I spent $5,000 booking a private dining room at Portland's most exclusive restaurant for Thanksgiving, hoping to finally mend my broken family. Instead of showing up, my mother texted me to eat by myself so I would not ruin their holiday vibe. I sat alone at a table set for 12, choking back tears of pure humiliation. But then the heavy mahogany doors swung open. It was my grandfather, and the thick leather envelope he dropped on the table held a financial secret that would absolutely destroy the people who abandoned me. My name is Paige, 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant in New York. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family and had to fight back. The crystal chandeliers in the VIP room of the Sterling Room cast a warm golden glow over a massive oak table. 12 places were set with silver cutlery and fine bone china. In the center, a beautifully glazed roasted turkey sat, surrounded by artisanal cranberry sauce, garlic mashed potatoes, and expensive bottles of Cabernet. The air smelled of sage and roasted butter. It was a feast fit for royalty, but the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I sat at the head of the table, staring at the empty chairs. It was 7 in the evening. Dinner was supposed to start at 6. I had spent 2 months of my hard-earned salary to secure this room. I wanted to create a perfect Thanksgiving to bridge the gap that had widened between me and my parents, Philip and Gail. Last year, they had denied me access to my share of the family trust fund, claiming I was too independent and had not contributed enough to the Reynolds family legacy. I thought this grand gesture would show them I still cared. Instead, I was sitting alone in a quiet room listening to ice melt in my water glass. A polite knock at the door interrupted the silence. The waiter stepped in, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He held a linen napkin over his arm and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, Mom," he said gently. "The kitchen is wondering if we should begin serving the hot sides, or if you would like to wait a bit longer for your party to arrive." I forced a tight smile, trying to hide the embarrassment burning in my cheeks. "Just a few more minutes, please," I replied, my voice betraying a slight tremor. "I am sure they are just caught in holiday traffic." The waiter offered a sympathetic nod and quietly backed out of the room, closing the heavy door behind him. The moment the door clicked shut, my phone screen lit up on the table. It was a message in the family group chat from my mother, Gail. My heart leapt for a second, thinking they were finally in the parking lot. I opened the message and all the air left my lungs. "Austin says Yvette has a much cozier setup at their house. Eat by yourself, Paige, and please do not make a scene and ruin the holiday for the rest of us." I stared at the glowing screen, unable to process the sheer cruelty of her words. My 30-year-old brother Austin, the golden child of the Reynolds family, had simply decided he preferred the aesthetic of his own house, and my parents had blindly followed him. They had not even bothered to call. They let me sit here waiting while they carved a turkey across town. My hands shook with a mixture of rage and profound hurt. I hit the call button on Austin's contact. It rang 4 times before he picked up. The background noise was loud, filled with clinking glasses and upbeat music. "Yeah, what is it?" he answered, his voice dripping with annoyance. "Austin, where are you guys?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I paid $5,000 for this dinner. We had an agreement." I could hear Yvette, his wife, laughing in the background. Yvette was a senior litigation lawyer at a prestigious firm, a brilliant black woman with a razor-sharp mind and an ego to match. She was currently making a joke about expensive restaurant food being overrated. "Look," Paige Austin sighed loudly into the receiver. "You are always so rigid and serious. Your whole forensic accountant personality is exhausting. Yvette spent all week setting up the new dining room, and it is just a better vibe here. You are a rigid outcast, and nobody wanted to sit through a stiff dinner answering your interrogations. Let us enjoy the holiday without your scrutiny. Just eat your expensive turkey and leave us alone." He hung up before I could say another word. The dial tone echoed in my ear. I lowered the phone to the table and finally let the tears fall. I covered my face with my hands, crying not just for the lost money, but for the realization that I meant absolutely nothing to them. I was just the family workhorse, the scapegoat they could cast aside whenever Austin demanded their attention. I sat there in pure humiliation, feeling completely broken. Then the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room swung open with a loud thud. I jumped, wiping my eyes hastily. It was not the waiter. Standing in the doorway, resting his weight on his polished ebony cane, was my 80-year-old grandfather, Charles Reynolds. He was the founder of Reynolds, holding a man of immense power and quiet authority. He was the only person in the family who ever saw my true worth. He walked straight toward me, his jaw set in a hard line of fury. He did not look at the feast on the table. He stopped right beside my chair and slammed a thick leather envelope down onto the table with a heavy thud. "They did not just abandon you today, Paige," he said, his voice low and vibrating with dangerous intensity. "You work yourself to the bone for them, and they use your identity to feed a monster. Open it, Paige. It is time to take back everything that belongs to you." I stared at the worn leather envelope resting on the pristine white tablecloth next to my untouched glass of water. My grandfather's heavy breathing filled the quiet space of the VIP room. He leaned heavily on his ebony cane, but his posture was as rigid and unyielding as the skyscrapers I navigated every day in Manhattan. For a moment, the absurdity of the situation paralyzed me. My parents and brother had left me to eat a $5,000 turkey alone, while the patriarch of the Reynolds family, the man who had supposedly iced me out of the family trust last year, had crossed the city on Thanksgiving night just to stand by my side. "Grandpa," I whispered, my voice cracking, "I thought you agreed with them. I thought you agreed I was not contributing to the family legacy." Charles scoffed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. He pulled out the heavy oak chair next to mine and lowered himself into it. He did not spare a single glance at the lavish feast spread before us. His piercing gray eyes remained locked onto mine. "I never said you were not contributing, Paige," he replied firmly. "Philip and Gail told you that. Your parents spun a very convenient web of lies to keep you in New York out of their way and completely in the dark. They needed you distracted while they dismantled the empire I built brick by brick." My mind raced, trying to connect the pieces. I had spent the last 7 years clawing my way up the corporate ladder at one of the most cutthroat financial institutions on Wall Street. I worked 80-hour weeks buried under mountains of corporate fraud investigations, tracing hidden assets and offshore accounts for billionaires. I missed holidays. I sacrificed relationships. I lived out of a suitcase and survived on black coffee and sheer willpower. I did it all because I believed I had to prove my worth to this family. I thought if I became the best forensic accountant in the country, my parents would finally look at me the way they looked at Austin. But Charles was now sitting beside me, dismantling that entire illusion. "Do you know what your brother has been doing while you dissect financial crimes until 2 in the morning? Charles asked, his tone laced with venom. "He has been playing the role of a venture capitalist on my dime. Austin wakes up at noon, plays golf at the country club, and lets his high-powered wife Yvette manipulate the legal boundaries of my company to fund their luxurious lifestyle. Your parents have been systematically draining the Reynolds legacy to prop up his pathetic facade." I shook my head, struggling to comprehend. But the trust fund, I countered. Dad told me the board restricted the disbursements. He said there was not enough liquidity to support my independent audits, and that Austin needed the capital to expand the family real estate portfolio. "Lies," Charles snapped, hitting the floor with the rubber tip of his cane for emphasis. "There is no real estate expansion. There is only a bottomless pit of Austin's debts and Yvette's insatiable appetite for designer status symbols. They drained the liquid assets 2 years ago, Paige. Every dollar I intended for your future, for your security, was funneled directly into Austin's pockets to cover his gambling losses and failed startup ventures." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The humiliation of being abandoned at this dinner table was rapidly being replaced by a much darker, more terrifying realization. The people who were supposed to protect me had been actively working against me. "But why ice me out completely?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Why go through the trouble of making me feel like a failure?" "Because a forensic accountant is the last person a thief wants in their inner circle," Charles said, leaning forward. His eyes narrowed. "If they let you get close to the family accounts, you would have spotted the missing millions in 5 minutes. Yvette knew that. She is a brilliant litigator and a master manipulator. She convinced your parents that you were a threat to the family unity. She convinced them to keep you isolated in New York. But keeping you away was not enough for them. He tapped a gnarled finger against the thick leather envelope sitting between us. The leather was worn soft from age, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and old paper. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb waiting to detonate. Charles reached out and pushed it an inch closer to me. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, revealing the profound sadness of a grandfather watching his family tear itself apart. But the softness vanished quickly, replaced by the ruthless businessman who had built an empire from nothing. "They did not just abandon you today, Paige," he said, every word striking like a hammer. "They have been bleeding you dry. Open it." My fingers trembled as I reached for the brass clasp on the back of the envelope. The metallic click sounded deafening in the silent dining room. I had spent my entire career uncovering financial crimes, exposing embezzlers, and tracking phantom money. I had seen the worst of corporate greed. Yet my hands had never shaken like this while holding a client file. This was not a client. This was my blood. I pulled the heavy flap back and slid the contents onto the white tablecloth right next to my empty porcelain plate. I expected to see a revised copy of the family trust. I thought perhaps Charles was showing me the altered will or the bank statements proving my parents had drained the corporate accounts. Instead, I was staring at a stack of documents with official watermarks from Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. It was a comprehensive tri-bureau credit report, and right at the top, printed in bold black ink, was my name, Paige Reynolds. My social security number was listed below it, unredacted. I blinked, trying to force my brain to process the numbers on the page. As a financial professional, my credit score was my most heavily guarded asset. A pristine financial background was a strict requirement for maintaining my CPA license and holding a senior position at a major auditing firm. For the last 10 years, I had maintained a flawless score of 810. I paid every balance in full. I carried zero debt. But the number glaring back at me from the consolidated report was not 810, it was 520. A score of 520 in the United States is a financial death sentence. It is the kind of score that gets job offers rescinded, apartment applications denied, and professional licenses revoked. I flipped to the second page, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes scanned the detailed breakdown of the accounts. There were no new credit cards. There were no mysterious medical bills or auto loans. There was only one catastrophic entry destroying my entire financial identity. It was a massive delinquency notice for a residential mortgage. A $1.5 million home loan registered in Oregon taken out exactly 14 months ago. The account was flagged in bright red letters. Status: 120 days past due. Pre-foreclosure proceedings initiated. I stared at the property address listed under the delinquent mortgage. I knew that address. I had just ordered a gift basket to be delivered there yesterday for Thanksgiving. It was Austin and Yvette's new luxury mansion. The very same house where my family was currently laughing, eating turkey, and mocking my absence. I stared at the property address printed on the delinquency notice. The black ink seemed to burn into the page. I was listed as the primary financial guarantor on a $1.5 million mortgage for Austin and Yvette. The loan had been originated exactly 14 months ago, and for the last 4 months, not a single payment had been made. My forensic training kicked in, overriding the shock and betrayal that threatened to suffocate me. I picked up the documents and began cross-referencing the data points with cold, mechanical precision. A drop in credit score from 810 to 520 did not happen overnight. It was the result of consecutive 90-day late reports, compounding interest penalties, and a complete abandonment of the debt obligation. They had not just fallen behind on a few payments. They had deliberately walked away from the mortgage while living inside the house. But how did I not know? As a senior auditor, I had credit monitoring services activated across all my financial profiles. I flipped to the second page of the Experian report and found my answer. The primary contact email linked to the monitoring alerts had been changed 13 months ago. It was reverted to an old university email address I had not accessed in almost a decade. The phone number listed for verbal verification was a prepaid burner line. They had systematically isolated my financial identity, ensuring I would never receive a single warning from the bank. I set the credit report down and looked at my grandfather. He watched me with a dark, heavy expression, waiting for me to connect the rest of the pieces. How did they bypass the identity verification? I asked, my voice echoing in the empty dining room. A bank does not just hand over $1.5 million without a rigorous background check and a physical signature. I sifted through the secondary documents Charles had provided in the leather envelope. There were copies of loan applications, digital signature certificates, and identity verification logs. Then the reality of my own foolish trust hit me like a physical blow. 7 years ago, when I first relocated to New York to begin my career, I was living in temporary corporate housing. I had officially forwarded all my personal mail to my parents' house in Portland for safekeeping. For almost a year, my tax documents, bank statements, and healthcare records had flowed directly into their hands. They possessed my social security number. They knew my mother's maiden name. They had the answers to every standard security question a lender could possibly ask. But they needed more than just numbers to close a jumbo mortgage. They needed current identification. A sickening memory surfaced. 18 months ago, my father had called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He sounded casual, upbeat, and entirely normal. He told me the lawyers managing the Reynolds family trust needed an updated copy of my driver license to keep their files compliant with new state regulations. I had been in the middle of a chaotic corporate merger at work. I did not question him. I snapped a photo of my license and emailed it to him from my phone. That single digital file had been the final key they needed to steal my financial identity and secure the loan. Still, the mechanics of this fraud were far too sophisticated for my parents or my brother. Austin could barely navigate his own checking account without incurring overdraft fees. My father relied on an army of corporate accountants to manage his taxes and investments. They were greedy and entitled, but they lacked the meticulous legal precision required to pull off a $1.5 million identity theft, bypassing electronic verification and establishing me as a liable co-signer without triggering federal fraud flags. To execute this, they needed someone with an intimate knowledge of financial law, corporate loopholes, and mortgage underwriting. I dug deeper into the leather envelope. Beneath the credit reports and the loan applications lay a separate manila folder containing the closing documents from the title company. I pulled out a thick packet of stapled paper. It was a secondary contract attached to the mortgage closing. A liability transfer agreement. I scanned the dense legal jargon. My eyes darted across the indemnification clauses, the default protocols, and the asset seizure hierarchies. It was an absolute masterpiece of corporate shielding. The document was explicitly designed to protect the primary occupants of the home, meaning Austin and his wife, while placing the absolute burden of default squarely on the co-signer, me. If the property faced foreclosure, the bank was legally directed to pursue my assets, my wages, and my investment accounts before they could even attempt to seize the cars in Austin's driveway or garnish his non-existent salary. The contract deliberately insulated them and served me up on a silver platter to the debt collectors. I kept reading, analyzing the structure of the document itself, the specific indentation of the paragraphs, the font choices, the peculiar aggressive phrasing of the indemnity clauses. I had reviewed thousands of legal contracts in my career, analyzing them for corporate sabotage and hidden liabilities. I recognized this specific formatting. It was the proprietary template structure used exclusively by one of the most ruthless litigation firms in the Pacific Northwest, the exact same firm where my sister-in-law Yvette had just been promoted to senior counsel. The realization settled over me, freezing the blood in my veins. Yvette had not just helped my family steal my identity. She had legally weaponized it. She had used her bar license and her firm's resources to draft a flawless trap, ensuring I would take the total financial and legal fall when Austin inevitably stopped paying the bill. She crafted a document that would ruin my life while keeping her own credit score immaculate so she could make partner at her firm. They had gathered in her cozy house today, carving a turkey and laughing at my expense while actively plotting my financial ruin. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought because I was miles away in New York working myself to exhaustion, that I was just a naive accountant who would quietly absorb the destruction of her life to keep the peace. I neatly stacked the fraudulent mortgage documents, the liability waiver, and the credit reports back together. I slid them into the leather envelope and secured the brass clasp. I did not shed another tear. The sorrow of being abandoned by my family was completely gone, replaced by a cold, clinical rage. I looked up at my grandfather. His hands rested on the silver handle of his cane. He did not offer any words of comfort because he knew I did not need them anymore. "They want to play with financial law," I said, picking up my coat from the back of the chair. "They want to commit wire fraud and identity theft and wrap it up in a pretty legal bow." Charles smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that mirrored my own. "They picked the wrong sister," I said. Charles leaned heavily on his cane, his sharp eyes following my finger as I traced the dense blocks of legal text. I pulled a silver pen from my purse and began circling specific clauses on the liability transfer agreement. I was no longer the discarded daughter crying over an untouched turkey. I was a senior forensic accountant dissecting a crime scene. "Look at this paragraph here," I said, my voice echoing off the paneled walls of the VIP room. Section 4. Subsection B. This is not standard boilerplate language for a residential mortgage. Yvette drafted a customized cross-collateralization rider. She specifically structured the loan so that in the event of a default, the bank is legally barred from seizing the primary physical asset right away. Instead, they are forced to liquidate the CO signer's liquid assets first. Charles leaned in closer, his jaw tightening. "They insulated the house," he noted, his business acumen instantly grasping the strategy. "Exactly," I replied, striking a hard line under the paragraph. "Yvette knows that Oregon foreclosure laws generally protect homeowners from deficiency judgments. If a normal buyer walks away from a mortgage, the bank takes the house and takes the loss. But Yvette bypassed standard residential protections by classifying this as an investment property under a secondary LLC, while listing me as the unconditional personal guarantor. If the bank forecloses, they do not just take the mansion. They are legally mandated to seize my investment portfolios in New York, garnish my corporate salary, and liquidate my retirement accounts to cover the balance before they even look at Austin and Yvette." The sheer malice of the document was breathtaking. It was a perfectly designed financial guillotine. Yvette had weaponized her litigation expertise to build an impenetrable shield around her husband while tying the noose directly around my neck. Charles struck the floor with his cane. "She used her law firm's resources to draft a document that essentially commits armed robbery with a fountain pen. Your parents knew about this." "They did not just know," I said, a bitter realization washing over me. "They actively justified it." A memory flashed in my mind, sudden and sharp, cutting through the adrenaline. 4 months ago, right around the time this mortgage slipped into delinquency, I had received an alert about a hard credit inquiry on my file. I had called my father, immediately panicked that my identity had been compromised. Philip had answered the phone from his country club, the sound of golf clubs clinking in the background. When I confronted him about the mysterious inquiry, he had not panicked. He had sighed, sounding utterly exasperated by my concern. "Calm down, Paige," my father had said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It was just a minor administrative check for a family investment. Austin and Yvette are closing on a property, and we needed to leverage your profile temporarily to clear a hurdle with the underwriters. Yvette needs a clean background to make partner at her firm. You are just an accountant. A little credit dip will not kill you." I stood frozen in the restaurant, my grip tightening on the silver pen as the memory played out. My father had framed identity theft as a casual family favor. He had diminished my entire career, minimizing the brutal 80-hour weeks and the grueling CPA exams I had passed, treating my professional integrity as an expendable resource. To Philip and Gail, Yvette's ambition to become a partner at a prestigious law firm was a crowning achievement worthy of protection. My career in forensic accounting was just a convenient tool to be exploited. "They needed a sacrificial lamb," I told Charles, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Yvette could not risk having a massive debt obligation or a foreclosure on her public record." Law firms run rigorous background checks on potential partners. Financial instability is a massive red flag for corporate litigators. If she defaulted on $1.5 million loan, her promotion would be dead on arrival. Austin has no credit to speak of because he has never held a real job, so they used me. And your parents facilitated it, Charles added, his gray eyes darkening with a rage that matched my own. They handed over your social security number and your digital signature to a predatory lawyer, all to ensure your brother could play house in a mansion he could not afford. It is worse than that, I said, flipping to the final page of the credit report. This was not just about buying a house. This was a calculated assassination of my independence. My parents hated that I moved to New York. They hated that I built a life outside their control, completely independent of the Reynolds family trust. By chaining me to a delinquent $1 million mortgage, they ensure my credit is destroyed. With a score of 520, my firm will eventually flag my profile during our annual ethics audit. I would lose my job. I would lose my apartment in Manhattan because no landlord accepts a tenant with a recent foreclosure. I would be bankrupt, destitute, and forced to crawl back to Portland, completely dependent on them. Charles remained silent, absorbing the terrifying scale of the betrayal. He had built a real estate empire by outsmarting ruthless competitors, but seeing that same ruthlessness turned against his own granddaughter by his own son was a different kind of horror. Yvette is a brilliant lawyer. I continued gathering the documents and tapping the edges against the table to straighten them. She knows how to hide behind indemnity clauses and electronic signature loops. She thinks because she drafted this from a high-power firm, I will be too intimidated to fight back. She thinks I will just take the hit to protect the family name, just like I have always done. I paused, pacing the length of the long oak table. She thinks she is untouchable because the digital signatures were routed through a third-party vendor, I added. But Yvette's arrogance is her ultimate weakness. Lawyers understand the letter of the law, but forensic accountants understand the metadata behind it. When you submit a jumbo loan application electronically, the underwriting software logs the IP address, the MAC address of the device, and the exact timestamps of every keystroke. If she routed this through her law firm's secure servers to bypass the bank's fraud detection, she left a digital trail leading straight back to her desk. I looked down at the cold, untouched Thanksgiving turkey sitting in the center of the table, a perfect symbol of my family's hollow promises. I reached out and pushed the silver platter aside. The sadness that had crippled me just an hour ago was entirely gone. It had been incinerated, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. I was no longer the neglected daughter desperate for a seat at their table. I was a senior forensic auditor who had dismantled international money laundering rings and brought down corrupt billionaires. I tracked digital footprints for a living. I knew how to find the hidden threads in any financial crime, and Yvette had just handed me a masterclass in fraud with her digital fingerprints all over it. I slid the credit reports, the forged mortgage agreements, and the malicious liability waivers back into the leather envelope. I snapped the brass clasp shut with a sharp, decisive click. I stood up, wiping away any trace of sadness. They want to play with financial law, they picked the wrong sister. Charles leaned back in his heavy oak chair, and a low rumble of laughter escaped his chest. It was not a sound of amusement. It was the sound of a patriarch watching a true apex predator finally awaken. For years, he had watched me play the role of the dutiful daughter, desperately trying to earn the affection of parents who only saw me as an inconvenience. He had waited patiently for the day I would finally snap. He wanted to see if I had the spine to fight back, or if I would allow them to crush me under the weight of their greed. Seeing me switch from a weeping victim into a cold and calculating forensic auditor gave him exactly what he needed. "I am glad to see New York did not soften you, Paige," he said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You found the mortgage fraud. You traced the digital fingerprints right back to Yvette and her arrogant law firm. But if you think a fraudulent home loan is the only financial crime your father and your brother committed this year, you are vastly underestimating their entitlement." Charles reached into the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek smartphone. He placed it on the white tablecloth right next to the fraudulent credit reports. You see, Paige, my grandfather continued, his gray eyes locked onto mine. A $1.5 million mortgage puts a roof over their heads, but it does not pay for the champagne they are currently drinking. It does not pay for Yvette to wear imported designer dresses that cost more than a reliable car. And it certainly does not pay for the brand new luxury yacht Austin just parked at the marina. I frowned, calculating his words. Austin has no legitimate income, I stated flatly. His venture capital firm is a shell company with 0 active clients. Yvette makes a substantial salary as a senior litigator, but even her income cannot support a massive mortgage, a yacht, and a country club lifestyle in Portland simultaneously. They would be bleeding cash every single month. Charles smiled, a humorless, razor-thin smile. They are bleeding cash every single month. My cash. He picked up his phone and unlocked the screen. Your father and your brother have been treating Reynolds Holding like their own personal piggy bank for 3 years. They have been using our top-tier corporate American Express cards to fund their entire existence. Austin has never closed a single commercial real estate deal in his life, yet his monthly expense reports claim he is wining and dining international investors. I audited the company ledgers myself yesterday morning. Austin used the corporate line of credit to put the down payment on that new yacht. He categorized it under corporate asset acquisition. Your father, who still holds a position as an executive director, officially authorized the transaction. My jaw tightened. Embezzlement. They were not just stealing my identity to secure a house. They were actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the family corporation to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. They write off 5-star resort vacations as business development trips. Charles continued, his tone growing colder with every word. They expense private dinners, luxury car leases, and jewelry. Philip even used the company accounts to pay for Yvette to host high society networking events for her law firm, trying to buy her way into a partnership. They thought because I am 80 years old, I was too blind or too tired to look at the balance sheets. They thought I would just quietly die and leave them the entire empire. Charles dialed a number on his speed dial and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered the line. Bradley speaking. Bradley it is. Charles. My grandfather said, his voice instantly shifting into the ruthless tone of a corporate titan. I need you to execute Executive Order 7 right now. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. The corporate attorney clearly understood the magnitude of that command. Are you certain? Sir Bradley asked. It is Thanksgiving night. The banks are closed, but our automated systems will trigger an immediate hard lock. This will cause significant operational disruptions for any executive currently holding an active card. I am entirely certain, Charles replied without a shred of hesitation. I want an immediate, unyielding freeze on all corporate credit lines, debit accounts, and expense accounts tied to Philip Reynolds and Austin Reynolds. No warnings, no grace periods, no temporary authorizations. You will flag every single transaction they have made over the last 36 months for a comprehensive internal audit. If they bought a single cup of coffee that was not for a legitimate client, I want it classified as corporate embezzlement. Understood, Sir Bradley said, his tone shifting to absolute compliance. The freeze is being initiated in the system right now. Their cards will be declined universally within the next 60 seconds. I will have the fraud department begin the expense audit first thing tomorrow morning. Good, Charles said. Do not answer any calls from Philip or Austin tonight. Let them panic. Charles ended the call and tossed the phone back onto the table. The silence in the VIP room felt different now. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of abandonment. It was the calm before a massive, devastating storm. I stood staring at the phone, processing the absolute genius of his timing. It was Thanksgiving night. Austin and Yvette were hosting a massive catered dinner at their fraudulent mansion. They were likely preparing to pay the private chefs, the bartenders, and the event staff. They were probably planning to swipe that corporate American Express card to cover the extravagant costs of the evening. Instead, they were about to face the ultimate humiliation. The card would decline. The illusion would shatter. Without those corporate accounts, Austin and Philip had 0 liquid cash to their names. Their entire existence was built on leveraging debt and stealing from the people who trusted them. I looked down at the cold roasted turkey sitting in the center of the table, untouched and completely irrelevant. I reached for my heavy wool coat draped over the back of the chair and slid my arms into the sleeves. I gathered the fraudulent mortgage documents, the liability transfer agreement, and my ruined credit reports, sliding them carefully back into the thick leather envelope. I tucked the envelope securely under my arm. Charles watched me, his hands resting on his cane. "Shall we go?" he asked. I buttoned my coat and looked my grandfather squarely in the eye. The betrayal had burned away, leaving only a sharp, unyielding resolve. "Yes," I replied, my voice cold and steady. "It is time to crash Thanksgiving." The drive from downtown Portland to the West Hills took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like crossing into another universe entirely. I gripped the steering wheel of my rental car tightly, while Charles sat silently in the passenger seat, watching the rain-slicked streets blur past us. We turned onto a private gated road lined with towering old-growth pines and manicured hedges. At the very end of the cul-de-sac stood the physical manifestation of my ruined credit score. Austin and Yvette's mansion was a sprawling modern masterpiece of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowed with warm amber light, putting their lavish Thanksgiving celebration on full display for anyone standing outside in the freezing cold. A dozen luxury cars were parked haphazardly in the massive circular driveway. I killed the engine and grabbed the leather envelope from the back seat. Charles refused my offer to help him out of the vehicle. He planted his ebony cane firmly on the wet asphalt and gave me a sharp confirming nod. We walked up the illuminated stone pathway together. I did not bother ringing the doorbell. I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors and stepped straight into the grand foyer. The air inside was thick with the scent of roasted truffles, expensive designer perfume, and burning cedar from a massive stone fireplace. Laughter and soft jazz echoed from the formal dining room down the hall. I walked across the imported Italian marble floors, my wet boots leaving dark, unmistakable prints behind me. Charles followed close behind his cane, clicking rhythmically against the expensive stone. As we reached the arched entrance of the dining room, I stopped and absorbed the scene before me. A 20-foot-long custom walnut table dominated the space, covered in silver platters, crystal decanters, and an extravagant catered feast that easily cost thousands of dollars. My parents, Philip and Gail, sat near the head of the table, radiating an aura of smug satisfaction. Yvette looked flawless in a silk designer gown, holding court with a group of relatives and sycophantic friends who hung on to her every word. Austin stood at the head of the table, holding up a glass of vintage champagne. To family, Austin declared, his voice booming over the ambient chatter. He wore a tailored velvet blazer and a smile of absolute sickening entitlement. "It has been a phenomenal year for Reynolds Real Estate. We secured this beautiful home, and as of this afternoon, we officially closed the deal on the new 70-foot yacht. We are calling it the Golden Standard. So let us raise a glass to hard work, to massive success, and to the people who make it all possible." The guests murmured in enthusiastic agreement and raised their crystal flutes into the air. My father, Philip, beamed with overwhelming pride, clapping his son on the back. It was a picturesque display of generational wealth and triumph, all built on a hidden foundation of identity theft, corporate embezzlement, and my destroyed financial future. I stepped out of the shadows of the archway and into the bright, warm light of the dining room. My mother, Gail, was the first person to spot me. Her triumphant, proud smile instantly curdled into a vicious scowl. She slammed her champagne flute down onto the table, causing the expensive liquid to slosh over the crystal rim and stain the white linen tablecloth. "Paige, what on earth are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice cutting through the festive atmosphere like a jagged knife. The jazz music seemed to stop, and the entire room fell dead silent. "You were supposed to be eating at the restaurant. I am not letting you march in here uninvited and ruin the good vibes of our holiday just because you are miserable." I did not say a single word. I just kept walking toward her. Austin rolled his eyes and let out a highly dramatic sigh, leaning back against his chair. Gail quickly stepped directly into my path, physically blocking my way to the dining table. We told you not to come if you were going to bring your toxic negative energy. She hissed, her voice low but carrying clearly across the quiet room. Look at yourself, Paige. You are 33 years old and completely alone. You have no husband, you have no children, and you have absolutely no life outside of your obsessive accounting spreadsheets. Do not bring your bitter spinster attitude into Austin's beautiful house just because you are furiously jealous of his financial success and Yvette's flawless marriage. You have always tried to drag your brother down because you simply cannot stand the fact that he actually achieved something great while you are just a corporate drone. I looked my mother dead in the eyes and sidestepped her completely. I did not offer a tearful emotional defense. I did not engage with her desperate attempts to diminish my worth or shame me in front of the guests. I walked straight to the head of the dining table where Austin stood frozen with his champagne glass hovering nervously near his chest. Yvette narrowed her dark eyes, tracking my every movement with sudden sharp legal apprehension. I unclasped the brass lock on my leather envelope and pulled out the thick stack of financial documents. I raised the paper high enough for my father, Yvette, and the surrounding wealthy guests to clearly see the bright red warning labels printed across the top of the pages. Then, with a sharp flick of my wrist, I slammed the $1.5 million past-due mortgage statement directly onto Austin's plate of catered turkey. The heavy stack of financial documents hit the porcelain plate with a sickening crack. Gravy splashed across the bright red lettering of the foreclosure notice. Austin flinched backward, knocking his crystal champagne flute onto the imported rug. It shattered instantly. The cheerful chatter of the dinner guests died abruptly, replaced by a tense, suffocating silence. I kept my hand pressed flat against the top of the mortgage statement, pinning it to his plate. My eyes locked onto his terrified face. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the icy precision of an auditor presenting a terminal finding. $1.5 million, Austin. I said, the words echoing clearly across the vast dining room. That is the exact amount you owe the bank for this beautiful house. But according to these documents, you are not the one legally obligated to pay for it. I am. So I want you to look me in the eye right now and explain exactly how my forged signature ended up on the bottom line of your delinquent mortgage. Austin stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. The arrogant smirk he had worn just moments ago completely vanished. His face drained of color, leaving him looking like a panicked child caught stealing from a cash register. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic stammering sound came out. I do not know what you are talking about, Paige, he stuttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. There must be some kind of clerical error at the bank. I swear I never put your name on anything. I leaned in closer, forcing him to shrink back into his velvet chair. Do not insult my intelligence, Austin, I replied. Banks do not accidentally attach random family members as primary guarantors on jumbo loans. Someone provided my social security number. Someone verified my mother's maiden name. Someone submitted a digital signature from a verified IP address. You stole my identity to buy a house you could not afford, and then you deliberately stopped paying the mortgage 4 months ago. Austin's eyes darted frantically around the room looking for an escape route. When he realized there was none, he immediately fell back on his favorite defense mechanism. He played the victim. You do not understand how much pressure I am under, Paige, he whined, his voice taking on a pleading, pathetic tone. The commercial real estate market is brutal right now. I had a few bad investments and the liquidity just dried up. Yvette and I needed a place that reflected our status to attract high net worth clients. I was going to pay it back. I just needed a little help to get over the hump. You have always been so greedy with your money. I did not think a temporary favor would ruin your life. Identity theft is not a temporary favor, I snapped. It is a federal crime. Before Austin could offer another pathetic excuse, a heavy hand grabbed my shoulder. I yanked my arm away and turned to face my father. Philip Reynolds stepped directly between me and his precious son, shielding Austin from my gaze. His face was flushed with anger, but he kept his voice in that low, patronizing tone he always used when he wanted to control a narrative. Paige, calm down right now, Philip ordered, casting a nervous glance at the wealthy guests watching the spectacle. You are becoming hysterical and you are embarrassing the family. There is no need to throw around ugly words like fraud or identity theft. I stared at my father, my chest heaving with cold fury. Hysterical, I repeated. My credit score just dropped nearly 300 points. I am facing personal bankruptcy because your son defaulted on a massive loan using my stolen credentials, and you want me to calm down. It was a temporary clerical maneuver to bypass a difficult underwriter, Philip insisted, waving his hand, as if swatting away a minor annoyance. Family helps family, Paige. That is how dynasties are built. Austin needed a financial bridge to secure this property, and you have zero real expenses. You live by yourself in a tiny apartment in New York. You do not have a husband. You do not have children to support. We leveraged your unused credit capacity to help your brother establish his portfolio. You should be honored to contribute to his success, instead of storming in here and throwing a tantrum over a few missed payments. A few missed payments, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You call 4 months of absolute delinquency a few missed payments. The bank has initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings. They are preparing to seize my investment accounts to cover his yacht and his mansion. You did not ask for my help, Dad. You sacrificed me to protect him. Philip scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. Do not be so melodramatic. No one is seizing your accounts. We were going to catch up on the arrears as soon as my end-of-year bonus cleared from Reynolds Holding. We kept it quiet because we knew you would overreact and act completely selfish about the whole thing. You always have been too independent for your own good. It is time you learned how to be a team player. The sheer delusion in his words was staggering. My father was standing in a mansion bought with stolen credit, defending the thief and gaslighting the victim. He genuinely believed that my entire existence, my hard-earned career, my spotless financial record was just collateral, meant to be consumed by his golden child. He expected me to not apologize for my outburst and quietly accept the destruction of my life to keep the family peace. I am not a team player, I said, staring right through him. I am the auditor who is going to burn your team to the ground. Philip opened his mouth to shout another reprimand, but a sharp melodic laugh cut through the tension. The crowd of guests parted slightly. Yvette stepped forward. She moved with the predatory grace of a seasoned litigator entering a courtroom. She wore a stunning emerald green silk gown, her diamond necklace catching the light of the chandeliers. She did not look panicked like Austin. She did not look embarrassed like Philip. She looked utterly unfazed. Yvette stopped at the edge of the dining table, placing a perfectly manicured hand on the back of Austin's chair. She looked me up and down, her dark eyes sweeping over my damp coat and practical boots with absolute crushing disdain. She tilted her head, her lips curving into a smile that was completely devoid of warmth. She was preparing to use her legal authority to squash me like a bug. Paige, you really should have called ahead before making such a theatrical entrance, Yvette said, her voice smooth and carrying the practiced cadence of a courtroom cross-examination. She stepped away from Austin's chair and began to slowly pace the length of the dining table, commanding the attention of every single person in the room. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Yvette continued, gesturing gracefully with her champagne glass. But you are far outside your jurisdiction right now. You are standing in a private residence, interrupting a private gathering. In the state of Oregon, entering a home without the explicit invitation of the lawful occupants and causing a disturbance constitutes criminal trespassing in the first degree. Yvette stopped pacing and locked her dark eyes onto mine. Her smile vanished entirely, replaced by a mask of absolute legal hostility. I have the chief of police for the Portland precinct on my speed dial. I play tennis with his wife every Sunday. I can have a squad car in this driveway within 4 minutes. You will be handcuffed, dragged out of here in front of all these lovely guests, and spend your Thanksgiving night in a concrete holding cell. Do you really want a criminal record, Paige? I hear corporate accounting firms are very strict about employing convicted felons. I did not flinch. I stood my ground, meeting her aggressive stare with absolute calm. She was trying to rattle me, trying to use her status and her legal vocabulary to force me into submission. It was the same tactic she used to bully opposing counsel in the courtroom, but I was not opposing counsel. I was the victim of her financial crime. You think you can intimidate me with a trespassing charge? I asked, my voice steady and completely devoid of fear. You forged my signature on a federal financial document, Yvette. You committed bank fraud. Yvette laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the high ceilings. Fraud, she mocked, shaking her head as if I were a child who had just mispronounced a simple word. You have a few pieces of paper with your name on them. That proves absolutely nothing. The signature on that mortgage was electronically verified and authenticated by a licensed notary public. As far as the law is concerned, you signed that contract willingly to help your brother, and now you are experiencing buyer's remorse. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, her designer perfume mixing with the scent of roasted turkey. Let me explain how the real world works, Paige Yvette whispered, her tone dripping with elite condescension. You are a number cruncher. You play with spreadsheets in a tiny cubicle in New York, and you think that makes you powerful. But I am a senior litigator at a firm that bills out at $1,000 an hour. We do not just practice the law, we shape it. We dictate the terms. If you even think about taking these baseless allegations to the authorities, I will personally see to it that you are utterly destroyed. She leaned in, pointing a manicured finger directly at my chest. I will sue you for defamation of character. I will sue you for slander and tortious interference with my husband's commercial real estate business. I will file so many injunctions and protective orders that you will be tied up in discovery for the next decade. I will ensure your legal fees eclipse the value of this entire house. You will go bankrupt paying retainer fees before a judge even bothers to look at your pathetic little credit report. You will lose your license, you will lose your job, and you will be begging us for a settlement just to pay your rent. The wealthy guests seated around the table murmured in approval. They were captivated by the display of power. To them, Yvette was a brilliant shark defending her territory against an unhinged and jealous relative. They enjoyed watching the brutal hierarchy of their social circle being enforced. My mother Gail seems to draw immense strength from Yvette's vicious monologue. The panic that had gripped her moments ago completely evaporated. She stepped out from behind my father, her chest puffed out with arrogant pride. You heard your sister-in-law, Paige Gale, shouted, her voice shrill and echoing with triumph. She knows the law inside and out. You cannot just storm in here throwing wild accusations and expect us to cower in fear. Yvette is a highly respected attorney and Austin is a successful businessman. You are just a bitter, lonely accountant who wants to ruin everyone else's happiness. My father, Philip, nodded vigorously in agreement, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with his wife and his daughter-in-law. The three of them formed a unified toxic wall, protecting the golden child who still sat frozen in his chair. We gave you a chance to be part of this family, Philip said, pointing toward the front door. We tried to include you, but you chose to be difficult. You chose to be a liability. Now you are going to face the consequences of your actions. I will not allow you to stand in my son's dining room and threaten his wife. Gail grabbed an empty wine glass from the table and slammed it down, making a sharp ringing sound to punctuate her husband's demand. You have absolutely no power here, Gail sneered, her face twisted into a mask of pure maternal rejection. Yvette holds all the cards and she will ruin you if you take another step against this family. So pick up your little pieces of paper, turn around, and walk out that door. Get out of Austin's house right now before we call the police and have you dragged away like the criminal you are. I did not shrink back. I did not apologize or turn toward the door. Instead, I threw my head back and let out a laugh. It was a genuine, sharp laugh that cut through the hostility radiating from my parents. The guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gail lowered her empty wine glass, her expression faltering as she realized her theatrical command had completely failed to intimidate me. You want to call the police? Gail, I asked, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Please do. Hand the phone to Yvette. Let her explain to the dispatcher how she plans to arrest the primary legal guarantor of this property for trespassing in a house that the bank officially recognizes as mine. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, breaking their unified wall. I looked directly at Yvette, forcing her to hold my gaze. You know the law, Yvette, I continued. You know exactly how you structured that liability transfer agreement. In order to satisfy the underwriters, you had to attach my name to the title documents. You made me the absolute financial safety net for this $1.5 million asset. By your own fraudulent design, I have a legal right to be standing in this dining room. I cannot trespass on a property that is actively destroying my credit score. My father opened his mouth to argue, but I raised a single finger, silencing him instantly. I was done playing the role of the discarded daughter. I was no longer the punching bag for their insecurities. I shed the familial victimhood entirely and shifted into the persona that made me one of the most feared auditors on Wall Street. I was a senior forensic accountant, and I was currently looking at a very sloppy crime scene. You called me a number cruncher, Yvette, I said, pacing slowly around the edge of the dining table. You said I play with spreadsheets in a tiny cubicle. You genuinely believe that your law degree makes you the smartest person in any room. That arrogance is exactly why you made such amateur mistakes. You think a notary stamp and a digital signature software make you invisible. You think because you hid behind a screen you left no trace. Yvette crossed her arms, but her posture had stiffened. Her eyes darted toward Austin, who was still sweating profusely in his chair. Let me educate you on what a forensic accountant actually does. I told the entire room, making sure every wealthy guest heard every single word. We do not just add up columns of numbers. We hunt. We track the movement of money across international borders. We expose shell companies. We dismantle embezzlement rings. We find the microscopic digital threads that arrogant criminals leave behind when they think nobody is smart enough to catch them. I stopped pacing and stood directly across the table from Yvette. When I saw my forged signature on that mortgage agreement, I did not waste my time crying to the bank. I explained, keeping my tone deadly calm. I immediately pulled the metadata report from the title company's server. Digital contracts do not just record a name. They capture an entire digital ecosystem. They record the exact timestamp. They record the geolocation. They record the MAC address of the device used to execute the document. And most importantly, they log the public IP address of the network that transmitted the fraudulent data. Yvette swallowed hard. The diamond necklace resting against her collarbone caught the light as her breathing suddenly became shallow. The smug, superior smile she had worn since I entered the room began to crack at the edges. You thought you were being clever, I said, leaning forward slightly. You bypassed the standard residential verification process by routing the loan application through a commercial portal. You needed a secure encrypted connection to convince the bank that the guarantor was actively signing the documents from an authenticated location. You did not want to risk doing it from your home Wi-Fi, where the location data would show Portland instead of New York. I reached into the leather envelope under my arm and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I did not slam it down. I held it up so the chandelier light illuminated the black text. This is the technical audit log from the digital signature platform I announced. It shows that my signature was applied exactly 14 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:15. It also shows the exact IP address that transmitted the final encrypted packet to the bank. The dining room was so quiet I could hear the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nobody dared to take a sip of their wine. Nobody dared to whisper. They were watching a high-powered attorney get systematically dismantled. I read the IP address aloud, reciting the numbers with cold precision. Then I lowered the paper and looked Yvette directly in the eyes. I ran a tracer route on that IP address, Yvette. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. It does not belong to a coffee shop. It does not belong to a public library. That IP address belongs to the dedicated, secure server of your prestigious corporate law firm. Gail let out a small, confused gasp, but Yvette remained perfectly still. The blood completely drained from her flawless face, leaving her looking like a pale ghost. Do you understand what that means? I asked, tilting my head. You used your law firm's secure network to intercept my personal data and forge a federal financial document. Because the data crossed state lines from your server to the bank's underwriting department in California, you did not just commit identity theft. You committed federal wire fraud. I took a step closer, ensuring she felt the full weight of her catastrophic error. You bragged about billing $1,000 an hour, I continued. You bragged about your connections to the chief of police. But your local connections cannot save you from a federal indictment. Using your employer's resources to commit a felony is a direct violation of the Bar Association's strict code of ethics. When I hand this metadata report over to the FBI and copy the state licensing board, you will not just lose your chance at becoming a partner. Your firm will disbar you and throw you to the wolves to save their own reputation. Yvette's mouth opened, but no words came out. The absolute disdain she had weaponized against me had evaporated. Her smug, superior smile vanished entirely. She was no longer looking at a bitter spinster. She was staring at the architect of her impending destruction. The silence stretched until the tension became almost physical. Yvette blinked rapidly, attempting to rebuild the legal fortress I had just shattered. She gripped the back of the dining chair, her knuckles turning white. "You are bluffing!" She finally spat out, her voice an octave higher than before. "Digital logs can be spoofed. IP addresses can be masked or manipulated by any first-year IT student. If you take this to a judge, I will bury you in technical experts who will testify that your metadata is entirely circumstantial." I did not even blink. "I am not taking this to a judge, Yvette. I am taking it to the federal agents at the IRS and the FBI who specialize in white-collar crime. They do not care about your expert witnesses. They care about server warrants and subpoenas." The murmurs among the wealthy guests grew louder. A few of the attendees, including a couple of partners from Yvette's own law firm, physically took a step back, distancing themselves from the epicenter of the scandal. The glittering high society facade of this Thanksgiving dinner was collapsing into a scene of radioactive corporate fraud. Gail lunged forward, grabbing my forearm. "Stop this right now," she hissed, her manicured fingers digging into my coat. "You are going to ruin everything. You are just doing this for money. You have always been jealous of your brother's wealth, and now you are trying to extort us. Name your price and get out of our house." I yanked my arm away from her grasp. "I do not want your money, Mom. I want my name off that fraudulent mortgage." Austin suddenly pushed his way past our mother. The panicked child demeanor he had worn moments ago was abruptly replaced by a desperate performative arrogance. He straightened his velvet blazer and reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a sleek designer wallet. He was cornered, and his only instinct was to throw cash at the problem until it disappeared. "Look, Paige," he said, puffing out his chest and adopting the condescending tone of a wealthy benefactor negotiating with a beggar. "Let us stop all this ridiculous talk about the FBI and federal wire fraud. You want to play hardball. Fine. You want to act like a big-shot auditor making demands in my dining room. I can play that game." Austin flipped open his wallet and pulled out a heavy metal American Express Platinum card. It bore the prestigious Reynolds Holding corporate logo embossed right above his name. He slapped it down onto the mahogany dining table right next to the gravy-stained foreclosure notice. The metal clattered loudly against the wood, drawing every eye in the room. "There it is," Austin declared, a smug smile spreading across his face. "The magic wand that makes all your little financial anxieties disappear. You want the arrears caught up. Consider it done. You want the mortgage paid off completely. I will have my wealth management team wire the funds tomorrow morning. I will even throw in an extra $100,000 for your trouble. Just sign a non-disclosure agreement and walk out that door." I stared at the metal card, and then up at my brother's face. The absolute delusion was staggering. He was offering to pay off a fraudulent debt using embezzled corporate funds to buy my silence about identity theft. "You are going to buy my silence using Grandpa's corporate expense account?" I asked, tilting my head. Austin scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Grandpa is an 80-year-old relic who spends his days napping in a recliner. I run the commercial real estate division now. I manage the acquisitions. I generate the revenue. That corporate account has a virtually unlimited ceiling because I am the one driving the Reynolds legacy forward. I can swipe that card for a $2 million property acquisition right now, and the bank will not even blink. That is the difference between us, Paige. You count other people's money for a living. I create wealth. I am the golden goose of this family." He turned to his wife, who was still standing frozen by her chair. Relax, Yvette, he said, offering her a cocky wink. I told you I would handle the finances. Let the accountant have her little temper tantrum. We will stroke a check, clear her precious credit score, and go back to enjoying our Thanksgiving. My father Philip nodded in agreement, his posture relaxing as Austin took charge. See, Paige, Philip added, his voice returning to its usual arrogant timbre. This is how real business is done. Austin is offering you a highly lucrative exit strategy. Take the deal. You get your clean record back and you walk away with a massive bonus. Everyone wins. I looked at the heavy metal corporate card sitting on the table. I remembered the phone call Charles had made just 45 minutes ago in the VIP room of the restaurant. I remembered the cold, ruthless tone of my grandfather's voice when he ordered his corporate attorney to execute a hard lock on every single account associated with Philip and Austin. I did not reach for the card. I just crossed my arms and waited. I knew the timing was going to be flawless. Keep your blood money, Austin, I said, my voice soft but razor sharp. You cannot afford to pay me off. You cannot even afford the turkey sitting on this table. Austin let out a loud, barking laugh. Are you deaf, Paige? I just told you I have unlimited access to the Reynolds holding capital. I am a millionaire. Right on cue, a sharp, piercing electronic chime cut through the dining room. It was not just a text message alert. It was a loud, urgent automated alarm emanating directly from the smartphone inside Austin's velvet blazer. Austin paused, his arrogant laugh dying in his throat. He pulled the phone from his pocket, glancing down at the screen. The moment his eyes registered the notification, his entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face at an alarming speed, leaving him looking entirely hollow. Another chime sounded, then another, a rapid, terrifying succession of alerts pinging loudly in the dead silent room. What is it? Yvette demanded, her legal instincts sensing the immediate danger. Austin, what is on your phone? Austin did not answer. He just stared at the glowing screen, his mouth hanging slightly open. I took a step forward, looking directly into his terrified eyes. Why do not you read it to the guests, Austin, I suggested. Tell your wealthy friends all about your unlimited capital. When he refused to speak, I walked right up to him and glanced down at the screen. It is an automated alert from American Express, I announced to the room, ensuring my voice carried to the very back, followed by an alert from Chase Manhattan, and another from Bank of America. It seems every single corporate card issued to Austin and Philip Reynolds has just been declined, suspended, and permanently frozen for suspected corporate fraud. Gail gasped, clutching her chest. Philip shoved past Austin, grabbing the phone to see the screen for himself. The denial messages were stacked one after another in bright red text, indicating massive financial intervention. Your grandfather, I said, looking at Philip and Austin, found out about your little yacht purchase. He found out about the embezzled expense reports. He initiated the freeze 10 minutes ago. You do not have unlimited funds, Austin. You do not even have a single cent to your name. Philip snatched the phone from Austin's limp hand. He stared at the glowing screen as if the red notification text was written in an alien language. His chest heaved with rapid, uneven breaths. This is impossible, Philip muttered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and absolute denial. Charles would never do this without consulting the executive board. He is senile. He does not even have the authorization codes for these specific tiers of corporate accounts. Philip tossed Austin's phone onto the mahogany table and frantically dug into his own tailored slacks. He pulled out a dark leather wallet and extracted his own black corporate card. His fingers flew across his phone screen as he opened the secure banking application for Reynolds Holding executives. The wealthy guests who had not already fled to the foyer were now watching him with morbid fascination. They were witnessing the spectacular real-time implosion of a local dynasty. I stood perfectly still, watching the exact second the truth shattered my father's arrogant facade. The biometric scanner on his phone authenticated his face, and the banking dashboard loaded. A massive red banner instantly dominated his screen. Account restricted. Please contact your corporate administrator immediately. Philip tapped the screen aggressively. He refreshed the app. He typed in his passwords manually. Every single attempt yielded the same glaring red restriction notice. He was locked out of his checking accounts, his executive credit lines, and his expense portals. "You did this!" Philip roared violently, shoving his chair backward. It crashed onto the imported rug, but he did not care. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You went crying to that old man and poisoned his mind with your twisted forensic accounting conspiracy theories. You manipulated him into freezing our assets just because you are bitter about a simple real estate transaction." "I am not the one who embezzled millions to buy a yacht." "Dad," I replied, my voice slicing through his hysterical shouting. "I am not the one who committed wire fraud. You did this to yourselves the moment you decided my identity was just another corporate asset you could exploit." Gail let out a shrill, ear-piercing shriek. Her carefully maintained mask of high society elegance completely dissolved into feral panic. The realization that the limitless fountain of wealth had just been shut off pushed her over the edge. She looked around the dining room at the spilled champagne, the ruined turkey, and the disgusted faces of Yvette's law firm partners who were quietly making their way toward the front door. "I am not letting you destroy my family!" Gail screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I am not letting you march into my son's house and tear down everything we have built. We gave you life, Paige. We raised you. And you repay us by trying to leave us with nothing." Gail snatched her diamond-encrusted smartphone from her designer clutch. Her hands shook violently as she stabbed at the screen. "What are you doing?" Yvette demanded, finally breaking her stunned silence. Her legal instincts kicked in, but she was too slow to stop the sheer momentum of my mother's meltdown. "I am calling the police," Gail announced, her eyes wide and manic. "I am calling 911 right now. I am going to tell them we have an unstable, violent intruder in our home. I am going to have you arrested for trespassing and extortion. Let us see how your precious accounting firm handles a mugshot on the evening news." "Mom, stop!" Yvette hissed, lunging forward to grab the phone. But Gail had already pressed the call button and raised the device to her ear. The speakerphone was accidentally activated, amplifying the ringing tone across the quiet dining room. 911, what is your emergency?" The calm voice of the Portland police dispatcher echoed from the phone. "Yes, I need officers immediately at the Reynolds estate in the West Hills," Gail cried out, injecting fake tears and breathless panic into her voice. "We have an intruder." She forced her way into our private Thanksgiving dinner. "She is screaming at us and making terrifying financial threats. We feel incredibly unsafe. Please send someone right away to remove her." I did not panic. I did not rush forward to snatch the phone. I did not beg her to hang up. I stood my ground, allowing my mother to dig her own grave deeper. As a forensic accountant, I knew the law just as well as I knew spreadsheets. I waited for Gail to finish her dramatic performance before I took a single measured step closer to the phone. "Hello, dispatcher," I said, my voice carrying clearly into the microphone. "My name is Paige Reynolds. I am the person this woman is referring to. There is no physical threat here. This is a financial dispute. But more importantly, I want to ensure you have the correct information before you dispatch officers to this address." "Shut up!" Gail screamed, trying to cover the microphone with her hand. But I spoke louder, overriding her completely. "If you run a check on the property records for this address," I continued, keeping my tone purely professional, "you will find that my name, Paige Reynolds, is legally listed on the deed and the mortgage as the primary financial guarantor. This woman, Gail Reynolds, is a guest in this house. She does not own it. Austin Reynolds does not own it independently. I do. Therefore, I cannot be trespassing on a property that is legally secured under my own social security number and my own signature." The dispatcher paused, clearly typing the information into their system. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said, addressing my mother, "are you confirming that the person you are reporting is a legal co-signer on this residence?" Yvette physically ripped the phone out of Gail's hand. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Filing a false police report was a crime, and Yvette's law firm partners were standing just a few feet away, watching her mother-in-law commit perjury on a recorded emergency line. "Dispatcher, this is Yvette Reynolds. I am an attorney representing the homeowners," Yvette said smoothly, her voice dripping with forced calm. "There has been a misunderstanding. The situation has been de-escalated. We do not require police assistance at this time. We apologize for the false alarm. Yvette ended the call and glared at Gail with absolute murderous intent. Are you out of your mind? Yvette hissed through gritted teeth. You cannot call the police and report her for trespassing when she is legally on the mortgage. She just told you that. She wants the police to show up. She wants them to pull the property records and document the fraud. You almost handed her a police report tying us directly to the crime. Gail stumbled backward, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. She looked from Yvette to the phone, and then finally to me. The reality of the trap she had built for herself finally settled in. Because they had forced my name onto the mortgage to secure the loan, I held absolute legal authority over the physical property. They could not kick me out. They could not call the police on me. They were entirely at my mercy in a house they stole using my identity. I looked at the ruins of their extravagant Thanksgiving dinner. The wealthy guests had entirely evacuated the dining room, leaving only my family standing amidst the wreckage of their own greed. Austin was staring blankly at his frozen phone screen. Philip was leaning heavily against the table, looking decades older than his actual age. Gail was quietly sobbing into her hands, realizing that her social standing was permanently eradicated. Yvette was staring at the floor, calculating the exact moment her legal career would implode. I adjusted the collar of my wool coat and secured the leather envelope under my arm. I had achieved exactly what I came to do. I had delivered the financial reality check they so desperately deserved, and I had done it without raising my voice or shedding a single tear. I turned toward the grand archway leading to the foyer. I did not look back at them. Enjoy the yacht, Austin, I said, my voice echoing cleanly through the silent mansion. You will not have it for long. The drive back to the hotel was silent. My grandfather Charles sat beside me, his face carved from stone, his hands resting on his cane. The rain lashed against the windows of the rental car, mirroring the storm I knew was brewing back at the mansion. I had dropped the bomb. Now I had to wait for the fallout. I dropped Charles off at his penthouse suite, ensuring his private nurse was there, before heading to my own modest hotel room. I stripped off my damp clothes, took a scalding shower, and collapsed into bed. I anticipated angry text messages, or perhaps a panicked phone call from my father attempting to bargain. I did not anticipate what actually happened. I woke up the next morning, the Friday after Thanksgiving, to my phone buzzing continuously on the nightstand. It was not a call. It was a rapid-fire sequence of text notifications. I picked up the device, squinting against the bright screen in the dim room. The first message was from my Aunt Susan, my father's sister. How could you, Paige? After everything they have done for you, extorting your own parents, threatening your sister-in-law, you are a monster. I frowned, my sleep-addled brain trying to process the words. I scrolled down. There were dozens of messages from aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. You are dead to us. Elder abuse is a crime, Paige. I hope you go to jail. Racist trash. Stay out of Portland. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I sat up, throwing off the covers. Extortion, elder abuse, racism. What on earth were they talking about? I opened the Nextdoor app, a local neighborhood network that my mother checked obsessively. Right at the top of the feed, with hundreds of comments and shares, was a post from Gail Reynolds. The post was a masterclass in manipulation. It was accompanied by a photo of my parents looking devastatingly sad, standing in front of their home. The text below it was a sprawling emotional essay. It breaks my heart to write this, but our family is facing a terrible crisis. Last night, our Thanksgiving dinner was violently interrupted by our estranged daughter, Paige. She has been absent from our lives for years, but returned last night demanding a massive payout from her elderly grandfather, whom she has been manipulating and isolating from us. I read the words, my blood running cold. Gail had taken the truth and inverted it completely. She continued. When we refused to give in to her extortion demands, she became unhinged. She began screaming racial slurs at my beautiful daughter-in-law, Yvette, simply because Yvette is a successful Black woman. She threatened to ruin Yvette's career and have us all thrown out of our home. We are terrified for our safety and the safety of our grandfather. Please pray for our family during this dark time. They had weaponized my confrontation. They had taken my legitimate demands for them to take my name off a fraudulent mortgage and twisted it into an extortion attempt. They had taken my threat to report Yvette's wire fraud to the Bar Association and spun it as a racially motivated attack on her career. It was brilliant in its cruelty. Yvette's legal fingerprints were all over the strategy. In the court of public opinion, accusation is often as good as a conviction. They knew they could not beat me on the financial facts, so they attacked my character. They painted me as a greedy racist abuser of the elderly. I switched over to LinkedIn, the professional networking site. Yvette had not been idle. She had shared a similar post, though carefully worded to avoid outright defamation, while heavily implying that I was using my position as an auditor to harass and extort her family. Her post was gaining traction rapidly, shared by her colleagues in the legal field and her connections in the Portland business community. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification. I saw the sender, and my stomach dropped. It was from Robert Vance, the managing director of my auditing firm in New York. The subject line read, "Urgent mandatory Zoom meeting 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time." I glanced at the clock. It was currently 6 in the morning in Portland, which meant it was 9 in New York. The meeting was starting right now. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my laptop, and threw on a professional-looking blouse over my pajama bottoms. I logged into the Zoom link, my hands shaking slightly. I was a senior forensic accountant leading a major audit for a Fortune 500 company. My entire career was built on impeccable ethics and absolute integrity. A public accusation of extortion and racism was not just a personal embarrassment, it was a professional death sentence. The Zoom screen loaded, revealing Robert Vance sitting in his austere corner office. Beside him on the screen was a woman I recognized as the head of human resources. They did not look happy. Page Robert began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "We have a very serious problem." I know, I said, keeping my voice steady. "The posts on social media, they are entirely fabricated, Robert. It is a retaliatory smear campaign initiated by my family after I uncovered massive financial fraud involving my identity." Robert held up a hand, stopping me. "We will get to that, Paige. But right now we are dealing with the immediate fallout. Yvette Reynolds is a senior counsel at a very prominent law firm. Her LinkedIn post has been viewed thousands of times. We are already receiving calls from clients questioning our oversight and your ethical standing." The HR representative leaned forward. "Paige, our firm has a zero-tolerance policy for the kind of behavior alleged in these posts. While we understand this is a family dispute, the public nature of these accusations and the specific allegations of extortion and racial bias are severely damaging to the firm's reputation." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "I have evidence," I stated firmly. "I have the metadata proving Yvette committed wire fraud using her law firm's servers. I have the credit reports proving they stole my identity. I can prove everything I am saying." "I hope you can," Page Robert said, his expression grim. "Because as of right now, I am pulling you off the Fortune 500 audit. You are suspended pending an internal investigation. If you cannot provide irrefutable proof to clear your name within 48 hours, we will have no choice but to terminate your employment." They had done it. My family had actually done it. They were going to destroy my career before I could even file a police report. I stared at the computer screen, watching the impassive faces of my managing director, David, and the head of human resources. The silence in my hotel room was deafening, contrasting sharply with the loud ringing in my ears. The rain continued to pound against the window pane outside, but all my focus was locked on the digital execution block waiting for me on the Zoom call. "David." I started, making sure my voice projected absolute confidence despite the panic threatening to choke me. "You have known me for 7 years. You recruited me right out of my entry-level firm. You know my unmatched work ethic, and you know my character. Character is subjective in the court of public opinion." Paige, the HR director, interjected, her tone clipped and completely devoid of empathy. "Right now, the public sees a senior auditor at our firm accused of leveraging her financial expertise to extort her elderly grandfather. They see severe allegations of racial bias against a prominent attorney. We cannot have the lead investigator of a multi-billion-dollar corporate merger trending on social media for extortion and bigotry. I leaned closer to the camera, refusing to break eye contact with either of them. I did not extort anyone. My grandfather, Charles Reynolds, is the one who handed me the evidence of their fraud. My brother and his wife, Yvette, committed identity theft. They forged my signature on a $1.5 million mortgage to buy a mansion they could not afford. When I confronted them last night with the absolute proof, they realized they were facing federal wire fraud charges. This coordinated social media smear campaign is their desperate attempt to discredit my professional integrity before I go to the authorities. David rubbed his temples, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. Paige, you come from the Reynolds family. You are the direct heir to a massive commercial real estate empire. Why on earth would your brother need to steal your identity to buy a residential house? Because I am the only person in that family with a pristine credit score, I fired back, my voice rising with hard-earned pride. And for the record, David, I am not the heir to anything. I walked away from their money a long time ago. I let the anger sharpen my words, using my history to build my impenetrable defense. I did not use a single dime of Reynolds' money to get where I am today. When my parents demanded I stay in Portland to be a glorified administrative assistant for my brother's failing shell companies, I flatly refused. I paid for my own tuition. I worked grueling night shifts, analyzing tax returns for small local businesses, just to pay for my CPA exam prep courses. I clawed my way to the top of this firm through 80-hour weeks and flawless, uncompromising audits. I built my entire life on my own financial independence, while my brother leached off my parents. Yvette needed a clean background to make partner at her firm, so they stole my identity because they thought I was just a disposable accountant who would quietly take the fall to protect the family name. I held up my hands, framing my face in the camera, to ensure they saw my absolute sincerity. I have spent my entire career hunting down corporate embezzlers and unmasking offshore accounts. I know how to spot a manufactured narrative. Yvette is a senior litigator. She knows exactly what words to use on LinkedIn to trigger a corporate panic without crossing the line into actionable legal defamation. She used the word extortion because I demanded my name be immediately removed from the fraudulent deed. She claimed racial bias because she knows it is the absolute fastest way to trigger a corporate HR investigation in today's social climate. It is a calculated tactical strike to force me into submission and bury the mortgage fraud. The HR director typed rapidly on her keyboard, her face illuminated by the harsh glow of her monitor. Be that as it may, Paige, we operate in a reality where public perception directly impacts our bottom line. The client for the upcoming tech merger audit has already flagged the LinkedIn post. They are expressing severe reservations about allowing you access to their highly classified internal ledgers while you are under a cloud of alleged financial extortion. We have a strict fiduciary duty to our clients to provide auditors whose ethics are beyond reproach. My ethics are beyond reproach, I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, chilling calm. I have the digital metadata proving Yvette routed the forged documents through her law firm's secure servers. I have the Tri-Bureau credit reports showing the delinquency. I have the customized liability waiver she drafted specifically to shield herself while leaving me entirely responsible for the debt. David leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on his mahogany desk. Then, you need to produce it, Paige. We cannot defend you to the board or the client based on your word alone, especially when the opposing narrative is being championed by a senior attorney at a highly respected law firm. The optics are terrible right now, and the firm cannot afford the liability of keeping you active on this massive corporate audit, while this messy family dispute plays out in the public sphere. So you are pulling me off the account? I asked, my chest tightening painfully. I had spent 6 grueling months preparing for this specific audit. It was my guaranteed stepping stone to becoming a partner at the firm. If I lost it, everything I had worked for would crumble. We are giving you a window, David replied, his tone turning strictly transactional. You have exactly 48 hours. You need to provide us with indisputable, legally binding proof that these posts are defamatory and that you are the verified victim of identity theft. We need police reports. We need the server metadata you mentioned. We need formal legal documentation that clears your name entirely and forces a massive public retraction from your family. The HR director nodded in sharp agreement, adjusting her glasses. If you cannot produce this irrefutable evidence by Monday morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, we will have no choice. You will be officially suspended without pay, pending a full internal investigation, and you will be permanently removed from the corporate audit team. 48 hours. 2 days to dismantle a viral smear campaign, orchestrate a devastating legal counterstrike against a seasoned litigator, and save the career I had sacrificed my 20s to build. It was an impossible deadline, designed to protect the firm at all costs. But they did not understand the heavy arsenal I was currently sitting on. They did not know that my grandfather was currently mobilizing an army of corporate lawyers to sever my family's financial lifelines. I understand the firm's position, I said, projecting absolute icy resolve. You have to protect the client and the brand. But let me be very clear, David. I will not just clear my name. By Monday morning, the people who posted those lies will be facing federal indictments. I reached forward and ended the Zoom call, closing the laptop with a sharp, definitive snap. I sat in the quiet hotel room, staring at the blank metal casing of my computer. The initial shock of the smear campaign had completely burned away, leaving only pure tactical focus. My parents and Yvette thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought threatening my livelihood would force me to surrender and accept their fraudulent debt. They were wrong. They had just given me the perfect excuse to stop holding back entirely. I picked up my cell phone and opened my contacts list. I had 48 hours to execute a flawless financial takedown, and I knew exactly who I needed to call first. But before my thumb could even press the contact icon on my screen, my phone erupted into a loud, jarring ringtone. The caller ID flashed brightly in the dim light of my hotel room. It was my mother. I considered ignoring it. I had just been handed a professional death sentence, and the last thing I needed was more of Gail Reynolds' toxic noise. But my forensic instincts took over. In any fraud investigation, every communication from the suspect is potential evidence. I tapped the screen to accept the call and simultaneously hit the record button on my secondary work device. "Good morning, Paige," my mother said. Her voice did not carry a single trace of the hysterical panic she had displayed in the dining room last night. Instead, it was dripping with a thick, sickeningly sweet smugness. "I assume you have checked your email by now. Yvette tells me corporate HR departments are very efficient when it comes to managing public relations crises." I kept my breathing steady, refusing to give her the satisfaction of hearing my anxiety. "I am listening, Gail." My mother let out a soft theatrical sigh. "You brought this entirely on yourself, you know. You marched into Austin's home acting like a dictator, throwing around wild threats about federal wire fraud and the Bar Association. You gave us no choice but to protect our family from your unhinged behavior. We simply controlled the narrative before you could spin your malicious lies." "Your narrative is a textbook case of digital defamation," I replied, my voice cold and flat. "You accused me of elder abuse and racism. You know perfectly well those are complete fabrications designed solely to trigger my firm's ethics clause." "Fabrications or not, they are highly effective," Gail countered, her tone hardening into absolute arrogance. "The court of public opinion has already reached a verdict, Paige. Yvette's colleagues are sharing her post across every major legal network. My friends in the neighborhood association are treating us like martyrs. Your prestigious accounting firm is not going to waste their time investigating the truth. They are going to cut you loose to save their own brand. You are currently standing on the edge of a very steep cliff, and your entire career is about to be pushed over the side." I gripped the edge of my hotel desk. The sheer, calculated malice in her voice was breathtaking. She was not calling to gloat blindly. She was calling to close a negotiation. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. My mother chuckled a sharp, triumphant sound. "I want you to be a team player, Paige. Yvette has drawn up a very simple electronic waiver. It officially transfers the full legal and financial responsibility of the mortgage entirely to you with no clauses or contingencies. It is a formal admission that you voluntarily co-signed the loan as a gift to your brother. I stared at the wall in front of me, processing the sheer audacity of her demand. You want me to voluntarily adopt a $1.5 million debt. You want me to happily accept the destruction of my credit score and bankrupt my future just so Austin can keep a mansion he stole using my identity. It is not stealing if you agree to it retroactively, Gail reasoned, her logic warped by decades of enabling my brother. Blood is thicker than water, Paige. You seem to have forgotten that during your little climb up the corporate ladder in New York. We paid for your braces. We raised you. We provided the foundation for your success. It is time you finally pay us back. Austin deserves this house. He deserves a break after all his stressful business ventures. A little debt will not kill you, but losing that fancy Wall Street job certainly will. The absolute narcissism radiating through the phone speaker was staggering. My mother was actively trying to ruin my life, and she had convinced herself she was morally justified in doing so. If you sign the waiver right now, Gail continued, her voice dropping into a transactional cadence, Yvette will immediately delete the LinkedIn post. I will remove my post from next door. We will issue a joint public statement claiming it was all a massive family misunderstanding caused by holiday stress. We will clear your name completely. You can go back to your managing director, show them the retraction, and keep your precious corporate audit. You get to keep your job, and Austin gets to keep his home. Everyone wins. I let her words hang in the air, allowing the silence to stretch. I visualized the entire scope of their extortion plot. They were leveraging my hard-earned career against their criminal debt. They believed that because I had sacrificed my entire youth to build my professional reputation, I would do absolutely anything to protect it, even if it meant shackling myself to their financial crimes. They were willing to destroy me entirely just to protect Austin. They did not care if I lost my apartment. They did not care if I spent the next 20 years paying off a house I would never live in. To Gail and Philip, I was not a daughter. I was a human shield. Are you still there, Paige? My mother demanded, her impatience bleeding through the phone. I am sending the DocuSign link to your email right now. You have 10 minutes to sign it before Yvette calls a local journalist who is very eager to run a story on your alleged elder abuse. I looked down at the recording device, capturing every single second of her blatant extortion attempt. The final shred of familial obligation I held toward my mother completely evaporated. There was no going back from this. There was no reconciliation. There was only war. You are right about one thing, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Blood is thicker than water, but my blood is no longer tied to yours. Paige, do not be stupid! Gail snapped, her facade of control beginning to crack. If you do not sign this waiver, you will lose everything. No, I corrected her. You will. I pressed the end call button, terminating the connection instantly. I did not wait for her to scream another threat. I did not care about the journalist or the next-door posts or the ticking clock on my career. I dropped the phone onto the desk and grabbed my coat. The time for defensive maneuvering was officially over. It was time to unleash the grandfather's arsenal. I left my hotel room and took a cab straight to the luxury high-rise where Charles maintained his primary residence. The Portland rain lashed against the windows of the car, but my mind was entirely clear. The extortion call had eradicated any lingering hesitation. My mother had drawn the battle lines, and I was about to cross them with the full force of a tactical nuclear strike. Charles was waiting for me in his private study when the elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse. The room smelled of rich leather and expensive scotch. He sat behind a massive desk, constructed of reclaimed wood, staring out at the gray skyline. His private nurse had already been dismissed for the morning, leaving us completely alone in the sprawling suite. I walked in and placed my phone on his desk. I did not bother with greetings. I hit play on the recording of the extortion call. Charles listened in absolute silence. His expression remained carved from stone as my mother's voice filled the quiet study, demanding I absorb a $1.5 million fraudulent debt to save my own career. He listened as she gleefully weaponized my hard-earned reputation and threatened to unleash a media circus if I did not submit. When the recording ended and the room fell silent again, Charles did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the desk. His anger was far more dangerous than that. It was freezing cold. "They think they are playing a game of public relations," Charles said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "They think because Yvette knows how to manipulate a social media algorithm, they hold the ultimate leverage. They have no idea what kind of war they just started." Charles pushed himself up from his chair, leaning heavily on his cane. He bypassed me entirely and walked slowly toward the far wall of the study. He pressed his hand against the edge of a large oil painting and swung it open, revealing a heavy steel biometric safe embedded directly into the reinforced concrete. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, and the heavy steel door clicked open with a quiet mechanical hum. "My firm gave me exactly 48 hours," I told him, watching as he reached into the dark cavity of the safe. "If I do not provide irrefutable legal proof that clears my name and proves the identity theft by Monday morning, they will suspend me without pay and strip me of my lead auditor position." They are terrified of the optics. Yvette is a senior litigator at a prominent firm. Her word currently carries weight. "Her word is about to become entirely worthless," Charles replied, pulling a stack of thick black binders from the safe. He carried them to the desk and dropped them with a loud thud that shook the wood. He looked at me, his gray eyes burning with a fierce, predatory light. "You are a forensic accountant, Paige. You hunt financial anomalies for a living. I am about to hand you the biggest anomaly of your entire career." I stepped closer to the desk, staring at the binders. "What is this?" "This is the real reason I froze their corporate accounts last night," Charles explained, tapping the top binder with his gnarled finger. "You thought I just cut off their credit cards to ruin their Thanksgiving dinner. That was merely a tactical disruption. The truth is, I have been conducting my own quiet investigation into Philip and Austin for the past 6 months. When I noticed inconsistencies in the quarterly profit margins of our commercial real estate division, I hired external auditors to bypass your father's executive privileges. What they found was not just negligence. It was systematic criminal enterprise. I opened the first binder and began flipping through the pages. My eyes scanned the spreadsheets, the wire transfer logs, and the vendor invoices. The financial architecture of their crimes was laid bare in black and white, and it was breathtaking in its sheer audacity. "Your brother's venture capital firm is nothing but a phantom pass-through entity," Charles said, pacing slowly behind the desk. "Austin and Philip created over a dozen shell companies disguised as independent contractors and property management consultants. For 3 years, Philip has been approving highly inflated invoices from these fake vendors, routing Reynolds Holding Capital directly into Austin's offshore accounts. They were not just stealing from me, Paige. They were actively embezzling corporate funds to sustain a lifestyle they could never afford." I traced a finger down a column of routing numbers. The sheer volume of stolen capital was staggering. "They took over $2.3 million," I whispered, doing the math in my head. "And they never reported a single dime of it to the Internal Revenue Service." Charles added, his voice dropping into a lethal register. "They committed massive corporate embezzlement, and then they committed federal tax evasion. Austin used that stolen, untaxed money to make the down payment on his yacht. He used it to fund Yvette's lavish networking parties, trying to buy her a partnership at her law firm." My mind raced as the puzzle pieces finally snapped together. "Yvette is a lawyer," I said, my heart pounding as the realization hit me. "She had to know where the money was coming from." "She did not just know," Charles corrected sharply. "She facilitated it. Look at the incorporation documents for those shell companies." I flipped to the legal section of the binder. The articles of incorporation were stamped and filed using the official registry credentials of Yvette's law firm. She had used her professional access to legitimize their phantom vendors, shielding them from standard corporate scrutiny. She was a direct co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation. "They are desperate," Charles said, leaning against his desk. "They pushed you to take the fall for the mortgage because the embezzled funds are finally drying up." They knew the internal audits were getting closer. They needed your pristine credit to secure their personal assets before the corporate well completely ran dry. They thought they could sacrifice you to save themselves. I stared at the documents, the sheer weight of their betrayal settling over me. They were willing to see me fired, disgraced, and bankrupt just to buy themselves a few more months of luxury. They had weaponized my identity, and now they were weaponizing the public to silence me. I need to take this to my managing director, I said, gripping the binder tightly. This proves everything. It proves their financial desperation and establishes the direct motive for the identity theft. You are not just taking it to your managing director, Charles said. He reached into the safe one last time. He pulled out a heavy titanium encrypted flash drive. He held it in his palm, the small device containing the absolute destruction of his own son and grandson. He did not look sad. He looked like a king passing his sword to his only worthy heir. This drive contains the raw master ledgers, Charles said, his voice echoing with finality. It contains every unredacted email, every fraudulent wire transfer, and every IP log tying Yvette's firm to the embezzlement. It is the kill shot page. He reached out and placed the cold, heavy metal drive directly into the palm of my hand. His fingers closed tightly over mine, securing the weapon in my grasp. They wanted to ruin your life to protect their greed, Charles whispered, his eyes locked onto mine with fierce, unwavering pride. Burn it all down, Paige. I left my grandfather's penthouse with the cold titanium drive gripped tightly in my fist. The heavy Portland rain continued to wash over the city, but I barely felt the chill as I stepped into the waiting town car. My mind was already categorizing the raw data, processing the timelines, and structuring the most devastating financial prosecution of my career. I did not head to a police station. I did not go to a local lawyer's office. I went straight back to my hotel room, flipped open my laptop, and sent a priority calendar invite directly to Robert Vance and the head of Human Resources. The subject line was not a plea for mercy. It read, Evidence Review and Strategic Briefing. It took them exactly 12 minutes to join the Zoom room. When their video feeds connected, neither of them looked pleased. Robert sat rigidly behind his desk, his expression tight with corporate impatience, while the HR director looked like she was preparing to read me my termination papers. They expected me to be crying. They expected me to offer a desperate, emotional defense or a quiet resignation to save the firm from further public embarrassment. Page Roberts started, his tone sharp and dismissive. I thought we made it abundantly clear that you were suspended. Calling an emergency meeting to argue your case without physical proof is a waste of corporate resources. Our client is already threatening to pull their account. I am not here to argue my case, Robert. I said, my voice radiating absolute command. I am here to present the physical proof you demanded and to demonstrate exactly why I am the lead forensic auditor for this firm. I am going to show you how a massive corporate fraud operation was constructed and exactly how I just dismantled it. I did not wait for their permission. I plugged the encrypted titanium drive into my laptop, entered the master passcode, and clicked the screen share button. The Zoom interface shifted, replacing my camera feed with a high-resolution display of my desktop. I opened the first financial ledger, pulling up the wire transfer logs Charles had provided. I watched the small video windows in the corner of my screen as Robert and the HR director leaned closer to their monitors, their expressions shifting from annoyance to sudden sharp confusion. What you are looking at is the internal master ledger of Reynolds Holding, I explained, keeping my cadence steady and professional. Specifically, you are looking at the commercial real estate division managed by my brother, Austin Reynolds. Over the last 3 years, Austin and my father, Philip, have embezzled approximately $2.3 million from the corporate accounts. They accomplished this by creating 14 different shell companies disguised as independent property management consultants. I opened a secondary window displaying the articles of incorporation for the phantom vendors. I highlighted the registry credentials in bright yellow. Notice the filing origin I instructed. Every single one of these fraudulent entities was registered using the official corporate credentials of a prominent Portland law firm. That firm employs a senior counsel named Yvette Reynolds, my sister-in-law. She used her professional license to legitimize these shell companies, effectively making her a primary co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar money laundering and tax evasion ring. Robert was completely silent now, his eyes scanning the documents with the trained speed of a Wall Street veteran. The HR director looked physically stunned. But what does this have to do with the social media posts? The HR director asked, her voice lacking its previous authority. Why are they accusing you of extortion? Because the embezzled funds finally dried up, I answered, seamlessly opening the credit reports and the forged mortgage documents. Because my grandfather initiated a quiet internal audit, and they knew the walls were closing in. They needed a massive injection of capital to secure their personal assets before the fraud was exposed. So they targeted the only person in the family with an immaculate financial background. Me. I zoomed in on the digital signature logs and the liability transfer agreement. I walked my bosses through the exact methodology of the identity theft. I explained how Yvette drafted the predatory indemnity clauses to shield herself. I showed them the metadata proving the forged mortgage application was transmitted directly from her law firm's secure servers constituting federal wire fraud. They posted those lies on Nextdoor and LinkedIn because I confronted them with this exact evidence last night. I stated switching the screen share off and returning my face to the main window. I cornered them. I proved they stole my identity. The extortion call my mother made this morning demanding I adopt the debt to save my job was their last desperate attempt to silence me. I recorded that call too, and it is currently sitting in a secure cloud folder waiting for the authorities. Robert sat back heavily in his leather chair. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling a long breath. The corporate irritation was entirely gone, replaced by profound professional respect. He was not looking at a liability anymore. He was looking at a financial assassin who had just flawlessly deconstructed a massive criminal enterprise in under 10 minutes. Page, Robert said, his voice carrying a new weight. This is a federal case. The FBI and the IRS will have a field day with these ledgers. But the firm's timeline remains an issue. The public narrative is still heavily against you. We cannot keep you on the Fortune 500 audit while those posts are actively going viral. Legal maneuvering takes months. We gave you 48 hours to clear your name. Even with this evidence, you cannot secure a federal indictment by Monday morning. I smiled a sharp, calculated smile. I do not need a federal indictment by Monday morning to clear my name. I just need to detonate the financial bombs they planted under their own feet. I leaned forward, bringing my face closer to the camera, ensuring they felt the absolute certainty in my plan. I am not stepping down, Robert. I am not accepting a suspension, and I am definitely not giving up my lead position on that corporate audit. You told me I had 48 hours. I am telling you I do not need 48 hours, I need 24. The HR director blinked, adjusting her glasses. 24 hours to do what exactly? To execute a total financial liquidation, I replied, my voice perfectly calm. By tomorrow night, the bank will seize their stolen mansion. The IRS will be handed the master ledgers, and the partners at Yvette's law firm will be handed the metadata, proving she used their servers to commit federal wire fraud. The social media posts will be irrelevant because my family will be too busy being arrested to update their LinkedIn profiles. Robert stared at me through the screen, a slow, appreciative smirk forming on his face. He recognized exactly what I was doing. I was not just defending my job. I was proving that my forensic accounting skills were lethal and unparalleled. I will see you both at the Monday morning audit briefing, I said, preparing to end the call, and I strongly suggest you watch the Portland local news tomorrow night. Saturday night descended on the West Hills of Portland with a bitter, freezing wind. Inside the fraudulent $1.5 million mansion, however, the atmosphere was completely insulated by wealth and desperate delusion. Yvette and Austin were hosting a high society cocktail party. It was a massive, calculated public relations maneuver designed to extinguish the blazing inferno of rumors surrounding our family. I sat in the back of a black Lincoln town car parked halfway down the street, watching the amber light spill from the floor to ceiling windows. I could see the silhouettes of the wealthy guests moving through the grand living room, holding crystal glasses and eating expensive catered hors d'oeuvres. They had pulled out all the stops. A string quartet was playing near the grand fireplace. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays. Yvette had apparently maxed out her personal credit cards to fund this event, since my grandfather had effectively frozen every single corporate account linked to the Reynolds name. She knew her law firm partners were getting suspicious after the LinkedIn posts and the subsequent corporate backlash. She needed to look them in the eye and project an image of absolute unshakable success. She needed to prove that the allegations of wire fraud and identity theft were just the hysterical ravings of a jealous, estranged sister. Through the scope of the binoculars my grandfather handed me, I watched my parents working the room. Philip and Gail were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They moved from group to group, projecting the ultimate image of a perfect, unified, and massively wealthy family. My father stood near the wet bar holding a glass of scotch, talking to two senior partners from Yvette's law firm. I did not need to hear his voice to know exactly what he was saying. He was using his commanding executive posture to sell them on Austin's brilliant future. He was bragging about the commercial real estate market, the new yacht, and the unyielding strength of the Reynolds legacy. He was actively masking the terrifying reality that he was currently locked out of his own checking accounts and completely cut off from the empire he claimed to control. Philip was a cornered animal playing the part of a lion. Across the room, Gail was engaging in her favorite pastime. She was playing the tragic, long-suffering victim to an audience of sympathetic, high-society wives. She held her hand over her heart, her face arranged in a mask of elegant sorrow. I knew she was feeding them the exact narrative she had weaponized on the Nextdoor app. She was telling them how she had sacrificed everything for me, how I had suffered a mental breakdown years ago and dropped out of college, how I had mysteriously returned to extort my own flesh and blood out of pure spite. She was securing her social standing by completely assassinating my character in front of the most influential people in the city. And then there was Yvette. She looked stunning in a sleek black evening gown, gliding between the guests, with the predatory confidence of a lawyer who believed she had already won the case. She was actively schmoozing the managing partner of her firm, laughing at his jokes and touching his arm with calculated familiarity. She was cementing her partnership promotion right there on the imported rug, convinced that her digital footprint was secure and that my corporate firm in New York had already silenced me. She genuinely believed she had outsmarted a senior forensic auditor. She believed the storm had passed. I lowered the binoculars and handed them back to Charles. He sat in the darkness of the town car, his hands resting heavily on his ebony cane. His face was entirely devoid of mercy. He looked at the dashboard clock. It was exactly 8:30 in the evening. "Are you ready, Paige?" My grandfather asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble in the quiet car. I adjusted the collar of my dark trench coat. I held a hard plastic clipboard containing the metadata logs, the master ledgers, and the finalized property deeds. I was more than ready. I was about to deliver a masterclass in absolute destruction. Right on schedule, 3 unmarked black SUVs pulled up silently behind our town car. The doors opened in perfect unison. I stepped out into the freezing Portland night. Charles climbed out beside me, his cane striking the wet asphalt. From the first SUV, 2 men emerged wearing cheap, ill-fitting gray suits, holding thick manila folders. They were the regional asset recovery representatives for Wells Fargo Bank. From the second and third SUVs, 4 individuals stepped out onto the street. They did not wear suits. They wore dark tactical jackets with 3 bright yellow letters printed boldly across the back. IRS. They were federal agents from the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, and they were heavily armed. We moved as a single unified front, walking straight up the illuminated stone pathway toward the massive mahogany double doors. We did not knock. We did not wait for the caterers to grant us entry. I pushed the heavy front doors open and stepped directly into the grand foyer. The sudden rush of freezing night air swept into the warm house, causing the nearest guest to turn around in shock. The string quartet faltered, playing a few discordant notes before grinding to a complete halt. The cheerful chatter of the cocktail party died instantly, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Every single eye in the living room locked onto the front entrance. Philip froze his glass of scotch, hovering inches from his mouth. Gail dropped her cocktail napkin, her face draining of color. Austin stumbled backward, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of champagne flutes crashing to the hardwood floor. Yvette turned away from her managing partner, her arrogant smile freezing on her flawless face. She saw me standing in the center of the foyer, but her eyes immediately darted to the people flanking me. She saw my grandfather. She saw the bank representatives. And then her dark eyes locked onto the tactical jackets worn by the 4 federal agents. The high society facade did not just crack, it violently shattered. Yvette's predatory grace completely evaporated the moment she registered the presence of the federal agents. For a fraction of a second, the brilliant litigator looked exactly like a cornered thief. But Yvette had built her entire career on aggressive bluster and intimidation. She recovered her composure, shoving her way through the stunned guests and marching directly toward me. Her dark eyes burned with a mixture of absolute panic and furious indignation. "Paige!" She spat, her voice dropping to a harsh hiss intended only for my ears. "What on earth do you think you are doing? You bring armed federal agents into my home during a private firm event. Have you completely lost your mind? I am a senior counsel. My managing partner is standing right over there. I will have you arrested for this stunt, and I will personally see to it that you are locked up for malicious harassment." I did not flinch. I did not take a step back. I looked at her with the same icy precision I used when finalizing an audit report. "This is not your home, Yvette," I replied, my voice carrying clearly in the dead silent foyer. "And you are in no position to arrest anyone." Before Yvette could launch another legal threat, the 2 men in the cheap gray suits stepped forward smoothly, flanking me. The taller of the 2 men pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his manila folder. He did not look intimidated by Yvette's designer gown or the presence of the wealthy elite surrounding us. He looked like a man executing a routine administrative procedure. "Mrs. Yvette Reynolds," the man said, his voice flat and professional. "My name is Agent Miller, representing the Asset Recovery Division of Wells Fargo Bank. We are here executing a direct order from our National Fraud Department." Yvette's face tightened, but she instinctively fell back on her legal training. "You have no jurisdiction here, Agent Miller. This property is fully secured under a commercial mortgage. Any dispute regarding payments is currently under review, and we have a 30-day grace period before any formal action can be initiated. You are trespassing on private property." Agent Miller did not even blink. He handed the thick stack of papers directly to Yvette. She hesitated for a second before snatching them from his hand, her eyes scanning the bold red lettering on the front page. "This is not a standard delinquency proceeding, Mrs. Reynolds," Agent Miller clarified, raising his voice slightly so the law firm partners standing nearby could hear every single word. The mortgage on this property was not just delinquent. It was secured using stolen identity credentials and forged electronic signatures. A federal investigation initiated by Ms. Paige Reynolds and verified by the Federal Bureau of Investigation has confirmed that the primary financial guarantor never authorized this loan. The murmurs among the guests grew louder. The word fraud echoed through the foyer. Yvette's managing partner, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair, took a very deliberate step away from the wet bar, moving closer to hear the exchange. "Because the origination of this loan constitutes felony bank fraud." Agent Miller continued, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "The financial contract is immediately voided. Wells Fargo is nullifying the mortgage in its entirety. The property is no longer recognized as your asset." Yvette's hands began to shake as she flipped through the pages. The legalese she had weaponized against me was now being used to dismantle her entire life. She looked up, her eyes darting frantically between me, the bank representatives, and the federal agent standing silently behind us. "You cannot do this," Yvette stammered, her voice losing its authoritative edge. "You cannot just void a mortgage and seize a property without a court order. We have tenant rights. We have due process. I will file an injunction tomorrow morning." "You can file whatever you like," Mrs. Reynolds, Agent Miller replied smoothly, pulling a secondary document from his folder. But as of an hour ago, an emergency federal judge signed this immediate writ of possession. Because the property was acquired through criminal enterprise, the bank is executing an emergency foreclosure and asset seizure to protect the collateral. Agent Miller handed her the writ of possession. The federal seal at the bottom of the page gleamed under the chandelier light. "You are no longer recognized as lawful occupants of this residence," Agent Miller stated, checking his watch. "The bank is taking immediate possession of the property. You and all individuals currently inside this structure have exactly 30 minutes to vacate the premises. After 30 minutes, the locks will be changed, and anyone remaining inside will be arrested for criminal trespassing on bank-owned property." 30 minutes. The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. The high society guests who had been drinking champagne and eating caviar just moments ago suddenly realized they were standing in the middle of an active federal crime scene. Panic erupted. The string quartet scrambled to pack their instruments. The caterers abandoned their trays of hors d'oeuvres and rushed toward the kitchen. The wealthy guests, the sycophants, and the law firm partners began a frantic, uncoordinated exodus toward the coat check. Nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire of an FBI fraud investigation. Nobody wanted their name associated with the spectacular downfall of Yvette and Austin Reynolds. Gail let out a piercing, hysterical scream, clutching Philip's arm as if he could magically stop the bank from taking the house. Philip stood entirely frozen, his mouth opening and closing silently, unable to process the absolute destruction of his golden child's empire. Austin finally moved. He stumbled forward, his velvet blazer looking suddenly ridiculous and pathetic. He looked at the bank representatives, and then at me, his eyes wide with desperate terror. "Paige, please," Austin begged, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. All our stuff is here. Our furniture, our clothes. We cannot pack a whole house in 30 minutes. Where are we supposed to go?" I looked at my brother, feeling absolutely nothing. "You do not have to pack the furniture, Austin," I replied coldly. "The bank is seizing everything inside to cover the outstanding interest and the legal fees associated with your fraud. You only need to pack a small bag." Yvette dropped the foreclosure documents onto the marble floor, her hands trembling violently. She turned toward her managing partner, who was rapidly putting on his overcoat near the front door. "David, please," Yvette pleaded, taking a desperate step toward him. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. It is a family dispute that got out of hand." David, the managing partner of her prestigious law firm, did not look at her with sympathy. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated professional disgust. He did not say a word to her. He simply shook his head, turned his back, and walked out the front door, stepping out into the freezing Portland rain. Yvette watched him leave, her entire career evaporating in front of her eyes. The high society facade had not just cracked, it had been pulverized into dust. The bank had taken the house, the guests had abandoned them, but the absolute worst was yet to come. The two bank representatives stepped aside, clearing the path. The 4 federal agents wearing the tactical IRS jackets moved forward, their heavy boots thudding against the marble floor. They did not look at the fleeing guests. They did not look at the catered food. They locked their eyes directly on Austin and Yvette. The 4 federal agents did not pause to allow the remaining guests to clear the room. They moved with the terrifying precision of a coordinated strike team. They bypassed the bank representatives and marched directly toward Austin, who was currently trembling near the ruined dining table. His velvet blazer was rumpled, and his face was the color of wet ash. Austin Reynolds, the lead IRS agent, announced, his voice booming over the sound of Gail's hysterical sobbing. "You are under arrest for federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." One of the agents stepped forward and grabbed Austin's arms forcefully, spinning him around to face the mahogany table. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the dining room. "Wait!" Austin shrieked, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. "This is a mistake. I am a commercial real estate developer. I run a legitimate venture capital firm. You cannot just arrest me." The lead agent did not look amused. A legitimate venture capital firm does not utilize 14 different shell companies to launder $2.3 million in embezzled corporate funds. And it certainly does not fail to report a single dime of that stolen income to the Internal Revenue Service over a 3-year period. The grand jury indictment was unsealed an hour ago. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison. Austin's knees buckled. If the two agents holding his arms had not been bracing him, he would have collapsed onto the imported rug. He looked frantically toward his parents, pleading for a bailout that was never going to come. Dad Austin wailed, tears streaming down his face. Do something. Call the corporate lawyers. Call Grandpa's legal team. They cannot do this. Philip stood completely paralyzed. His hands hung limply at his sides. He could not call the corporate lawyers. Charles had already severed his access to the firm, and the very attorneys he wanted to call were the ones actively assisting the federal investigation. The golden child was being hauled away in handcuffs, and Philip was absolutely powerless to stop it. Yvette, however, was not paralyzed. Her survival instincts kicked in with brutal, calculating efficiency. She saw her husband in handcuffs. She saw the federal agents. She saw her entire high society life collapsing into a federal prison sentence. And she made the immediate, ruthless decision to throw Austin completely under the bus. Officers, Yvette said, stepping away from Austin and raising her hands in a placating defensive gesture. I am an attorney. I can assure you I had absolutely no knowledge of my husband's business dealings. We keep our finances strictly separate. If he committed tax evasion or corporate embezzlement, he did so entirely on his own. I am a victim of his financial deception just as much as his family is. Austin's head snapped up, staring at his wife in absolute disbelief. Yvette, he gasped. What are you doing? I am protecting myself. Austin. Yvette snapped, her voice cold and devoid of any affection. I am not going down for your pathetic shell companies. Yvette turned toward the front door, looking for her managing partner David, who was currently shrugging into his overcoat and watching the spectacle with undisguised horror. David, Yvette called out, projecting the image of a betrayed innocent spouse. You know my ethics. You know I would never compromise the firm. I am filing for divorce the moment the courthouse opens on Monday. I will cooperate fully with the authorities to ensure he faces justice. The lead IRS agent reached into his tactical jacket and pulled out a secondary arrest warrant. He did not look at David. He looked directly at Yvette. That will not be necessary, Mrs. Reynolds. The agent stated, his voice completely devoid of emotion. Because you are not a victim, you are named as a primary co-conspirator in the federal indictment. Yvette froze. Her hands dropped to her sides. Excuse me. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering. The agent continued, stepping toward her. We have the digital metadata proving you utilized your law firm's secure servers to forge federal mortgage documents. Furthermore, we have the incorporation records proving you used your legal credentials to legitimize the phantom vendors your husband used to launder the embezzled funds. I did not! Yvette stammered, her flawless legal composure shattering into sheer panic. That is circumstantial. You cannot prove I knew the funds were embezzled. We do not need to prove you knew, the agent replied, signaling for another officer to step forward. We have the raw master ledgers from Reynolds Holding. We have the IP logs. We have the emails. You did not just know about the fraud, Mrs. Reynolds. You engineered it. The second agent grabbed Yvette's wrists and pulled them behind her back. The second set of handcuffs clicked shut. Yvette let out a sharp, breathless gasp. The brilliant litigator, the woman who had threatened to destroy my life just an hour ago, was now standing in her own dining room, wearing a designer gown and federal handcuffs. David, the managing partner of her law firm, had seen enough. He stepped away from the front door and walked deliberately toward the center of the foyer, stopping just a few feet away from Yvette. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly disappointed. Yvette, David said, his voice carrying the heavy, authoritative weight of a senior legal partner. You used our firm's servers to commit federal wire fraud. You jeopardized the integrity of our entire practice to fund a luxury lifestyle. David, please. Yvette begged, her voice trembling. It is a misunderstanding. I can explain the logs. You do not need to explain anything. David replied, his tone absolutely final. As of this exact moment, your employment at the firm is terminated with cause. You are no longer a senior counsel. You are no longer an associate. I am personally drafting the report to the State Bar Association tonight. You will be disbarred before you even make bail. Yvette's knees gave out. She slumped forward, her designer gown pooling around her on the marble floor. She was not just going to federal prison. Her entire identity, her prestigious career, and her arrogant superiority had been completely annihilated in less than 3 minutes. "Take them out," the lead agent ordered. The federal officers hauled Austin and Yvette toward the front doors. Austin was sobbing openly, begging his parents for help. Yvette was completely silent, her head bowed in absolute defeat. They were marched out into the freezing Portland rain, past the gawking neighbors and the flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles waiting in the driveway. The mansion was suddenly very quiet. The caterers had fled. The guests were gone. The bank representative stood silently near the doorway, waiting for the final occupants to vacate so they could change the locks. Philip and Gail were left standing in the ruins of the dining room. Their golden child was gone. Their stolen mansion was seized. Their entire reality had been dismantled. Gail collapsed onto a dining chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent hysterical sobs. Philip looked like a man who had just survived a shipwreck, only to realize he was stranded on a deserted island. He turned slowly, his eyes finding my grandfather Charles, who was still standing quietly by the front entrance, leaning on his ebony cane. "Dad," Philip whispered, his voice cracking, "please, you have to help him. You have the best lawyers in the country. You can fix this. You can make it go away." Charles did not move. He looked at his son with an expression of profound, unyielding disappointment. He had watched Philip and Gail destroy their family. He had watched them steal from their own daughter to protect a criminal, and he was not going to offer them a single ounce of mercy. Charles remained perfectly still as Philip dropped to his knees on the marble floor. The great patriarch of the Reynolds family looked down at his son with an expression devoid of any paternal warmth. Gail was weeping hysterically, her hands clutching at the hem of Charles's tailored overcoat, her voice a garbled mess of apologies and pleas for salvation. Austin was already gone, hauled out the front door in handcuffs by the federal agents, his arrogant veneer entirely demolished by the reality of federal prison. "Dad, please." Philip choked out, his voice cracking as he stared up at his father. "You cannot let them do this to Austin. You have the best lawyers in the country. You know the judges. You can fix this. We will pay it back. I swear to you, I will pay back every single cent. Just do not let my son go to a federal penitentiary." Charles tapped the rubber tip of his ebony cane against the marble, the sharp sound silencing Philip instantly. "You are going to pay it back," Charles repeated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried clearly through the empty foyer. "With what money, Philip? You have no access to the corporate accounts. Your personal credit lines are frozen. And as of an hour ago, the board of directors officially ratified my executive order." Charles pulled a folded legal document from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the floor right in front of Philip's knees. "You are hereby stripped of your title as executive director of Reynolds Holding," Charles announced, every word striking like a hammer blow. "Your shares in the company are immediately revoked and transferred back into the primary family trust. You have been entirely excised from the corporate structure. You have absolutely zero equity, zero authority, and zero remaining value to the empire I built." Gail let out a fresh wail of despair, burying her face in her hands. Philip stared at the document, his hands trembling violently. "Dad," Philip whispered, his face completely drained of color, "you are leaving us with nothing. We will be bankrupt." "You left yourselves with nothing," Charles countered, his tone devoid of any mercy. "You stole $2.3 million from the family trust to feed your son's pathetic delusions of grandeur. You authorized fraudulent invoices. You facilitated money laundering. And then when your own greed threatened to expose you, you allowed a predatory lawyer to steal your daughter's identity and saddle her with your criminal debt. You sacrificed Paige to save yourselves. Charles stepped back, creating a deliberate physical distance between himself and his son. My lawyers will be filing a civil suit against you on Monday morning for the full recovery of the embezzled funds, Charles stated. I expect the immediate repayment of the $2.3 million. I do not care if you have to liquidate your retirement accounts. I do not care if you have to sell the cars in your driveway. You will repay the family trust, or I will see you join Austin in federal prison. Philip collapsed forward, his hands pressing against the cold marble floor as he realized the absolute finality of his father's verdict. There was no negotiation. There was no secret bailout. The fountain of wealth had been permanently shut off, and the bill was coming due. I watched them from the edge of the foyer, feeling a strange, profound emptiness. For 33 years, I had craved their approval. I had worked myself to the bone, sacrificing my youth and my peace of mind, all in the desperate hope that one day they would look at me with the same pride they bestowed upon Austin. I had endured their casual cruelty, their constant dismissal, and their relentless favoritism. But looking at them now, kneeling in the ruins of their stolen mansion, crying over the loss of their money and their status, I realized I did not want their approval anymore. I did not want anything from them at all. Gail looked up, her tear-streaked face finding mine. Paige, she sobbed, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. Please, you have to talk to him. You have to make him stop this. We are your family. We are your blood. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at my mother, the woman who had tried to destroy my career and bankrupt my future just 24 hours ago, and I felt nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. Blood is thicker than water, Mom, I said, repeating the exact words she had used during her extortion call. But my blood is no longer tied to yours. I adjusted the collar of my dark trench coat, securing the leather envelope under my arm. I did not scream. I did not gloat. I did not offer them a tearful, emotional speech about how much they had hurt me. They were not worth the energy of my anger anymore. You wanted me to eat my Thanksgiving dinner alone, I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. Now you have the rest of your lives to eat alone. Enjoy the rainy streets of Portland. I turned away from them, walking smoothly toward the massive mahogany double doors. Charles was already waiting for me on the front porch, the bank representative standing silently nearby, ready to change the locks the moment we vacated the premises. I stepped out into the freezing Oregon night, the rain washing over the stone pathway. The black Lincoln Town Car was waiting at the end of the driveway, its engine purring quietly in the darkness. I opened the door and slid into the warm, luxurious leather interior, Charles settling into the seat beside me. As the driver pulled away from the curb, I looked out the tinted window one last time. The flashing red and blue lights of the federal vehicles were fading into the distance, carrying Austin and Yvette toward their impending indictments. The mansion stood dark and silent, stripped of its wealthy occupants and sealed by the bank. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark interior of the car. My managing director, David, and the head of human resources were still waiting in the secure Zoom room. I had kept the connection open during the entire raid, allowing them to witness the absolute destruction of the smear campaign in real time. I unmuted my microphone, looking directly into the camera. The primary architect of the identity theft has been arrested for federal wire fraud and money laundering. I reported, my voice crisp and professional. The property associated with the delinquent mortgage has been seized by the bank, and my name has been legally cleared from the fraudulent debt. The individuals responsible for the defamatory social media posts are currently in federal custody. David stared at me through the screen, a look of profound, almost terrified respect etched across his features. He had asked for irrefutable proof, and I had delivered a federal takedown. I believe my ethics file is now entirely clean. I continued closing the credit report tabs and opening the audit ledgers for the Fortune 500 merger. I will see you both at the Monday morning briefing. We have a corporate restructure to finalize. I ended the call and closed the laptop with a decisive snap. The storm raged outside the car windows, but inside, I was entirely at peace. My career was intact, my credit was cleared, my toxic family was permanently destroyed. I leaned back against the leather seat, watching the city lights blur past, finally free to build my empire on my own terms. The story of Paige teaches a profound lesson. Sharing DNA does not obligate you to endure exploitation, and setting ironclad boundaries is the ultimate act of self-care. For years, she sought validation from a family that only viewed her as a disposable financial asset. When she finally stopped trying to earn their conditional love, she reclaimed her life and her power. True family should nurture your growth, not weaponize your success or demand your sacrifice to cover their toxic mistakes. We must learn to walk away from tables where respect is no longer served. Share your own experiences with setting difficult family boundaries and comment below.